After discarding the cold coffee, Klein returned to the armory to collect a thick stack of historical records and transcripts from Old Neil. With the materials in hand, he ascended the dimly lit spiral staircase, guided by the glow of wall-mounted lamps, and emerged into the familiar setting of the Blackthorn Security Company. The rhythmic sound of his footsteps echoed in the silent corridors as he navigated through the building. After exiting the staircase, Klein oriented himself and made his way to the second office, which he now knew belonged to the civilian staff. Over the past 2 days, Klein had familiarized himself with the layout of the Blackthorn Security Company. Visitors entering the premises were greeted by a spacious reception hall furnished with sofas and tables. Beyond the partition lay the inner corridors. To the left were 3 rooms: Mrs. Oriana's account room, a modest rest area with sofa beds, and the staircase leading underground. On the right were another 3 rooms: Captain Dunn Smith's office, the civilian staff office equipped with a typewriter, and the Nighthawk's entertainment room. Klein had previously caught Leonard Mitchell and a couple of teammates in the entertainment room, engrossed in a card game he recognized as Fighting the Landlord. Emperor Rochelle had renamed it Fighting Evil, though the rules remained unchanged. The office was unusually quiet. Brett, having worked the night shift, was taking his well-earned rest, and Rosen manned the reception desk. The carriage driver, Cesare Francis, was out on his routine errands. When Klein opened the door to the civilian staff office, he found it empty, save for the imposing presence of the Ackerson Model 1346 typewriter. Klein approached the typewriter and, after taking a deep breath, began to practice typing. At first, his muscle memory betrayed him, instinctively converting the local language into Chinese pinyin. Only after focused effort did he adapt to Klein's native recollections and type without error. The typewriter's rhythmic tapping filled the room like a melody forged from the marriage of metal and industry. Klein quickly completed the expenditure application but chose not to interrupt Dunn Smith immediately. Instead, he devoted his attention to studying the documents from Old Neil, reinforcing his knowledge of mysticism and history. When noon approached, Klein stretched, organized his materials, and finally headed to Dunn's office. A soft knock on the door was met with a gruff invitation. Dunn, awaiting lunch delivery, glanced at Klein's application and smiled faintly. "Did Old Neil teach you this?" "Yes," Klein replied without hesitation, fully willing to implicate Old Neil. Dunn signed the application with his dark red fountain pen. "I'm submitting the quarterly budget request to the church and police department. I'll include yours. Once it's approved, collect the funds from Mrs. Oriana. This afternoon, you can start drawing your spirit pendulum." Klein nodded, his tone steady but his expression betraying his excitement. Before leaving, he asked casually, "Shouldn't July's budget have been submitted in June?" Dunn paused, sipped his coffee and sighed. "June was chaotic. We had 3 major cases. I forgot." Klein chuckled, wisely retreating from the topic. Thus began Klein's structured routine. Every morning, he dedicated time to cogitation exercises, followed by 2 hours of mysticism lessons and an hour and a half reviewing historical texts. After lunch, he would nap briefly, draw bullets, and head to the shooting club for practice. His afternoons often involved visiting Welch's former residence before returning to Iron Cross Street, blending practicality with economy by walking to save on carriage fares. Whenever possible, he honed his spirit vision and spirit dowsing, occasionally stopping to buy groceries. Far from Tingen, in a private laboratory brimming with alchemical apparatus, a tall, blonde Audrey examined the bubbling liquid in her cup. As the mixture settled into a viscous silver substance, her face lit up with delight. "I truly have a talent for mysticism," she mused. Succeeded on the first try. She carefully set aside the remaining materials she had prepared as a contingency and took a deep breath, ready to drink the spectator potion. Before she could, the sound of barking interrupted her concentration. Audrey frowned, quickly hiding the potion in a dark corner before heading to the door. Outside, her golden retriever Susie wagged her tail enthusiastically. Audrey's maidservant, Annie, approached from the corridor. "Didn't I instruct you not to disturb me during experiments?" Audrey scolded lightly. Annie looked apologetic. "My apologies, Mississippi. The Duchess has sent an invitation for afternoon tea and a literature salon." Feigning frailty, Audrey replied, "Inform my mother that I'm unwell and must rest. The sun has left me dehydrated." After Annie departed, Audrey returned to the laboratory, only to find the door ajar and Susie licking the last drop of silver liquid from the shattered cup. Audrey froze, horrified, as Susie sat obediently, wagging her tail. Meanwhile, on a stormy island shrouded in perpetual tempests, Alger Wilson stood aboard the Blue Avenger, bidding farewell to a fellow cleric of the Storm Church. "Why remain at sea when you could rise to prominence within the kingdom?" the man asked. Alger's stoic expression did not waver. "The sea is the Lord's domain. It is my duty to safeguard it. As the cleric departed, Alger muttered under his breath, "You do not understand, not yet." Back in Tingen, a storm raged as Klein joined Roseanne and Brett for lunch in the reception hall. The meal, a modest office ration from Old Will's restaurant, consisted of bread, soup, and a meager portion of meat. As they ate, a knock sounded at the door. A man in a drenched suit entered, his expression stern. "Is this the former mercenary squad?" Roseanne replied smoothly, "You could say that." The man adjusted his wet top hat and coughed. "I have a mission request." "A mission request?" "You've got the wrong place." Klein suppressed his urge to chuckle at the visitor's words. This so-called security company's signboard was more of a formality than a functional description. Still, he held his tongue, though he couldn't help wishing for a message board or screen where he could share his sarcastic musings. But then, Klein recalled that he himself had once posed a similar question. The captain's answer still echoed in his mind. They could take on freelance jobs if time permitted, and the earnings would contribute to the team's petty cash and bonuses for participants. Roseanne's eyes sparkled as she considered the visitor's words. After a moment's thought, she said with a sweet smile, "Our security personnel are currently out on assignments. The earliest they might return is in an hour. If your matter isn't urgent, you could consider our services." Among the 6 official Nighthawk members, Captain Dunn Smith was occupied at the cathedral, engaged in a mysterious discussion with the bishop. Leonard Mitchell was guarding Cheney's gate in his stead. Meanwhile, Corpse Collector Fry and Sleepless Royale Radine were assisting the police with a robbery case in Golden Indus Borough that hinted at cultist involvement. Sleepless Kenley White was on leave, and Midnight Poet Seekatron had gone to Raphael Cemetery for patrol duty. This left only the remaining 2, Old Neil, who no longer took missions due to his frailty, and Klein, a novice still fumbling through his training. "They're all out," the lanky man, holding his umbrella, frowned as he removed his hat and offered a polite bow. "I see. Sorry for the intrusion. Goodbye." He turned on his heel, descending the stairs and disappearing into the storm outside. Rain and wind howled through the streets as he vanished from sight. "What a shame." Roseanne sighed as she watched him leave. Though she wouldn't have received a share of any commission, she had been hoping for a chance at a sumptuous meal. "There's no helping it," Klein remarked, putting down his cutlery. He had reluctantly finished the turnip and vegetable soup despite not being particularly fond of it. Cheney's gate always needs someone on watch. "What were you expecting, Brett to take the mission? Or yourself?" Roseanne rolled her eyes and giggled. "Brett? No. But you? Perhaps. Our Mr. Seer." The moment the words left her lips, Roseanne clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening in horror. The door to the reception hall wasn't fully closed. If someone overheard even a hint about Beyonders, it could be considered a major breach. "Good thing the captain isn't around." Roseanne peered nervously toward the door, then stuck her tongue out mischievously. "Or I'd have to go for confession again." Klein and Brett shared a laugh as they began cleaning up their lunch. Once they finished, Klein, who hadn't brought an umbrella, decided to stay at the Blackthorn Security Company until the rain subsided. He picked up a newspaper and settled onto a comfortable, slightly worn sofa for his afternoon break. The airship route from Backlund to Desi Bay is now in service. The complete anthology of Great Detective Mansing will be released soon. Legolas Weapons Advertisement. Standard 6-shot revolver for £3 and 10 soli, double-barrel gun for £2. Klein flipped through the Tingen City Honest paper leisurely until his attention was caught by a piece of grim news. The suspect responsible for the murders of Mr. Welch and Miss Naya has been apprehended. This marks a much-needed reprieve from the terror that gripped North Borough, Golden Indus Borough, and East Borough. Welch's father, Mr. McGovern, a prominent banker, has escorted his youngest son's remains back to Constant City for a grand burial. Klein reread the article several times, a heavy sigh escaping him. It seemed Welch's father had accepted the police's version of events without seeking further investigation. His grief, though real, likely could not match that of parents who had lost their only child. "Once everything settles down, I'll bring flowers to their graves," Klein thought. Just as he decided to rest in the break room, a sudden knock came at the door. "Please come in," Roseanne called out, startled awake from her light doze. The door creaked open, and the lanky man from earlier stepped inside, his expression tense but resolute. "May I wait here? Your security personnel should return soon, right?" he asked, doing his best to mask his anxiety. Roseanne gestured to a nearby sofa. "Of course. Please have a seat." Curious, Klein asked, "Who referred you to our security company? How did you find us?" The man hesitated, then gave a rueful smile. "I've visited every nearby mercenary group, security company, and private investigator. You're my last hope. The others are either fully occupied or lack the manpower. Honestly, if not for the meal delivery waiter, I wouldn't have known this company existed. Not quite the glowing reputation I imagined. Klein thought wryly. Rosen added, the others are so busy? Are there that many missions? The man sighed as he settled into the sofa. You must have heard of the armed burglary on House Street. The criminal behind it is ruthless, and the wealthy in Tianjin are terrified. Many have hired additional guards and detectives, leading to a shortage of security personnel. Klein exchanged a bemused glance with Roseanne. Despite the apparent boom in the security industry, Blackthorn Security Company remained untouched, a testament to the Nighthawk's success in concealing their true operations. Just as the rain began to taper off, Leonard Mitchell emerged from behind the partition. His black vest hung loosely over his shoulders, and his green eyes gleamed with curiosity. Who's this? Roseanne brightened. Is Captain back? The lanky man looked startled. He'd been watching the entrance intently but hadn't noticed anyone enter. Roseanne chuckled awkwardly. We don't always use the front door. Leonard snapped his fingers nonchalantly. I'm a member of the security team. How can we help you? The visitor, introduced as Klee, explained his predicament. His employer's son, young Elliot Vickroy, had been kidnapped. Despite the police's involvement, Mr. Vickroy sought additional help to locate the kidnappers and ensure his son's safe return. The reward? £100 for finding the hideout, $200 for a successful rescue. Leonard leaned back with a smirk. All right. No problem. He glanced at Roseanne. My lovely poetess, draft a contract please. With Roseanne muttering about Leonard's penchant for quoting others, the contract was hastily prepared and signed. As Klee left, Leonard turned to Klein with a mischievous grin. I'll need your help on this one, Leonard said, his tone casual but firm. Klein blinked, caught off guard. Me? Leonard nodded. I handle combat, tracking, and support. But finding people? That's your territory. You don't expect old Neil to brave this weather, do you? After a pause, Klein agreed, both nervous and eager to test his newfound abilities. Let's hope this goes well, he thought, anticipation tinged with unease.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
While looking at Klein, Leonard smiled and nodded. Then, do you need anything from them? He had cooperated with old Neil and company numerous times, so he naturally knew that divination required a medium, especially when the person being divined was not present. Klein thought for a moment before saying to Klee, I need some of Elliot's recent clothes which have not been washed or starched. It would be better if you have any accessories he used to wear on him. He tried to choose ordinary mediums, not something that would normally invite questions. But even so, Klee wore a look of puzzlement. Why? After his question, he added, I have a picture of young Master Elliot on me. Why? Because we are divining his location. Klein was momentarily at a loss for an answer. If he answered truthfully, ignoring the fact that it violated the confidentiality clause, Klee would likely storm out immediately and rip apart the contract while cursing, this bunch of cheats. If that works, why don't I find the most famous spirit medium in Alwa County? By the side, Leonard Mitchell chuckled and said, Mr. Klee, my partner, colleague rears a unique pet. Its sense of smell is sharper than a hound's. That's why we need clothes that little Elliot wore and items he used to wear on him to aid us in finding him. As you know, clues typically bring you to a general region. As for the picture, we would need it too. Both of us need to know what little Elliot looks like. Klee accepted the reason by nodding slowly. Will you be waiting here, or will you be going with me to Mr. Vickroy's residence in the city? Let's go together. It saves time, replied Klein simply. Not only was he eager to try out his abilities as a beyonder, but he also wanted to save the child. All right, the carriage is downstairs. As Klee spoke, he took out a black and white photograph and handed it to Leonard. It was a picture of Elliot Vickroy alone. He was about 10 years old with rather long hair that nearly covered his eyes. There were obvious freckles on his face and he did not seem to stand out. Leonard glanced at it and handed it to Klein. Klein took a careful look and placed the photograph into his pocket. Then, he took his cane and put on his hat. He followed the two out of Blackthorn Security Company and boarded the carriage downstairs. The carriage's interior was rather spacious. It was lined with thick carpet and a tiny table to rest items on. As Klee was around, Klein and Leonard did not say a word. They quietly took in the experience of traversing the pooling roads in a carriage. The carriage driver is quite good. Leonard broke the silence after some time with praise and a smile. Yeah. Klein answered perfunctorily. Klee forced a smile and said, Your compliments are his honor. We will be there soon. As they were afraid of alerting the kidnappers, the carriage did not stop at the Vickroy's residence. Instead, It stopped at the side of a nearby street. Clee held an umbrella and returned along. After waiting for some time, Leonard talked to Klein again. My surmise the last time was not without a goal. I was just trying to tell you that the notebook will definitely appear again. Perhaps it might be soon. That really isn't a happy surmise. Klein used his chin to gesture towards the carriage driver outside, indicating that he did not wish to discuss sensitive topics with outsiders around. Leonard whistled and turned his head to look out the window. He saw raindrops streak across the glass, leaving behind blurry marks. It made the world outside a complete blur. After a while, Clee returned with a bag of items. Since he walked in a hurry, the edge of his trousers were soiled and his shirt front was slightly wet. These are the clothes young Master Elliot wore yesterday. This is the storm amulet he used to wear. Klein took it and glanced at it. He discovered it to be a miniature gentleman's formal suit, a small shirt, vest, bow tie, etc. And the storm amulet was made of bronze. It was carved with symbols representing gales and sea waves, but they did not trigger Klein's perception. I'll recount in detail the incidents leading up to young Master Elliot's kidnapping. Hopefully, it will let you find him easier. Clee sat down and described the nightmare that happened in the morning, hoping that the helpers he went through great trouble to hire would be of help. Klein and Leonard held no interest in the specifics. All they cared about was the number of kidnappers, if anything unusual had happened, or if they had any weapons. 3. Normal, armed with firearms, after obtaining the desired information, they bade Clee farewell and hired a two-wheeled light carriage. Unlike public carriages, private hire carriages were either four-wheeled or two-wheeled. They were charged either by time or distance. The latter was at 4 pence a kilometer in the city and 8 pence a kilometer outside. The former cost 2 soldi per hour or part thereof. After the first hour, there were additional charges of 6 pence every 15 minutes. In inclement weather, or if the customer needed to go faster, the fare could even be higher. Klein had heard from Isaac that in the capital Backlund, these carriage drivers were famous for quoting outrageous prices. To him, taking a private carriage was quite a luxury. However, he did not need to worry about this at the moment since Leonard had tossed 2 1 soldi notes to the carriage driver. Charge it by the time. After Leonard gave his instructions, he closed the carriage's door. Where are you going? The carriage driver was delighted and puzzled as he held the 2 notes. Wait a moment. Leonard cast his gaze at Klein. Klein nodded slightly and took out Elliot's clothes. He spread it out on the carriage's floor and then wound the storm amulet around his cane's handle. He held the silver-inlaid black cane and hung it straight over Elliot's clothes. He gathered the sphere of light in his head as his mind rapidly turned still. His brown eyes quickly turned deeper in color as he entered a half-cogitation state. He felt his body's spirit turning light. He vaguely saw the world of spirits everywhere. He silently said, Elliot's location. After repeating it 7 times, he released his grip of the black cane, but the cane did not fall to the ground. It remained standing in front of him even though the carriage was shaking. Minute but invisible stirrings happened around Klein and he felt as if pairs of eyes were looking at him. Over the past few days, Klein had felt this sensation occasionally when he was in the state of cogitation or spirit vision. With a little fear, he looked at the cane with his deep black eyes. He recited once again in his heart, Elliot's location. Elliot's location. After he finished saying that, the cane fell and pointed straight ahead. Straight. Klein held the cane and said in a deep voice. His voice sounded a little ethereal as though it could penetrate the unknown world. This was one of the divination abilities he had grasped. It was called dowsing rod seeking. The tool of choice had to be wooden, metallic, or a mixture of both. In ordinary circumstances, he would require 2 real dowsing rods. Dowsing rods were shaped like 2 straight metal wires tapered to an edge. He would hold on to the shorter side and turn it to ascertain the correct direction. But as a seer, Klein realized that through practice, he could search for people directly using this method. He could also use his cane as a replacement for dowsing rods. The direction in which the cane fell was the direction of the item he was seeking. As for the Antigonus family's notebook, Klein could not remember it at all. Without the slightest impression, there was no way for him to find it. Go straight. Leonard instructed the carriage driver loudly. We will tell you when there's a need to turn. The carriage driver did not understand why that was necessary, but the notes in his pocket and the willingness of his passengers to hand over the money kept him quiet. He chose to follow the strange instructions. The carriage proceeded slowly, passing through one street after another. Midway, Klein used dowsing rod seeking to correct their direction. After the carriage circled a building once, he finally determined that Elliot was inside. It had only been 30 minutes since they bade Clee farewell. After sending off the cane, Klein did not continue using Elliot's clothes. Instead, he placed the cane, entwined with the storm amulet, directly onto the ground. His eyes turned dark once again as the raindrops around him suddenly spun in place. The cane fell to the front with a slant. Klein pointed at the staircase and said, "There. At times, I really envy old Neil. Similarly, I envy you now." Upon seeing this scene, Leonard smiled with a sigh. N/O/vel/b//jnd/c//om. Klein shot him a glance and replied with a calm tone, "This is nothing difficult. If you are willing to learn, you would definitely be able to master it. Your perceptivity should be very high, right?" Leonard nodded and chuckled. "That's not something good." He quickened his pace and walked into the building amid the ending rain. Klein was afraid of drenching his formal suit, so he jogged in tow. The building only had 3 stories. It was similar to a unit block from Earth. The entrance to each floor was situated along the flight of stairs. There were only 2 units on per floor. Klein used dowsing rods seeking on both the first and second floors, but the cane remained still while pointing upward. The 2 of them quieted their footsteps and arrived at the 3rd floor. Klein once again placed the black cane on the floor. Whoosh! A breeze blew across the stairs as his pupils changed colors. The darkness seemed like it could suck the souls of people. Whoosh! 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 Sobs seemed to sound out around them. Klein relaxed his palm as the cane with the entwined storm amulet magically stood erect. He silently read Elliot's location again. He watched his black cane drop silently as it pointed to the right room. They should be in there. While Klein picked up his cane, he tapped his glabella twice. Various colors saturated as he looked at the right room. He saw all sorts of auras inside. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 kidnappers and 1 hostage. The numbers match. One of their auras is short. It's likely Elliot. Mr. Klee said that they have 2 hunting rifles and a revolver, Klein whispered. Leonard chuckled. "Let me recite a poem for them. Why be a kidnapper? Why can't you happily be civilized person?" He put down the bag with Elliot's clothes and took 2 steps forward. His expression suddenly turned serene and melancholic. His magnetic and deep voice gradually sounded. "Oh, the threat of horror, the hope of crimson cries. One thing at least is certain, that this life flies. One thing is certain, and the rest is lies. The flower that once has bloomed forever dies." Leonard's singing sounded like a lullaby as it lightly resounded through the doors and into the winding wooden stairwell. Klein's mind immediately turned torpid. He felt like he saw a silent moonlight and serene rippling lake. His eyelids rapidly turned heavy as if he were about to fall asleep standing. Amid these indistinct sensations, he also felt a strange, formless, and indifferent focus on his back. It felt like he was wandering the spirit world himself. A baffling sense of déjà vu suffused as Klein suddenly found his train of thought once again. With his strong spiritual perception and extreme familiarity with cogitation, he barely escaped the influence of the midnight poem. However, he remained serene and could hardly evoke any emotions. Soon, Leonard stopped singing as he turned his head with a smile. "I'm considering asking Captain's permission to apply for a Phaenopotter lute. How can there not be an accompaniment when singing?" "Heh, I'm just kidding. I can hear them asleep." The black-haired, green-eyed Nighthawk with his poetic vibe took a stride forward and walked to the door that separated them from the kidnappers and hostage. He suddenly moved his shoulder and threw a punch at the door's lock. Crack! The wooden board around the lock shattered in a muffled manner. "This requires precise control." Leonard turned his head and smiled. He then reached his hand into the hole and opened the door. Klein, who had regained consciousness, was not as confident as him. He reached under his armpit, drew his revolver, and turned the cylinder, making sure that he could shoot at a moment's notice. As the door swung back, he saw a man sleeping on a table with a gun by his feet. Another man was rubbing his eyes in a daze while trying to stand up. Bam! Leonard slid forward and struck the awakening kidnapper unconscious. Klein planned to enter as well when he suddenly sensed something. He turned around abruptly and faced the stairwell. Tap, tap, tap. Footsteps were approaching from below. It became clear that something was a hatless man in a brown coat circling the stairwell in his progression toward the 3rd floor while hugging a paper bag of bread. Suddenly, he stopped. He saw a gun's barrel aiming at him with a metallic luster. His pupils reflected a young man dressed in a half-top hat, black formal suit with a bow tie of the same color. It also reflected the cane which rested along the rail and the dangerous revolver. "Do not move. Raise your hands." 3, 2, 1. Klein's tone was deep but relaxed. He held the revolver with both hands as he tried to imagine the man as a target from his practice. Amid the tense atmosphere, the man in the brown coat threw the bag of bread and slowly raised his hands. "Sir, is this a kind of a joke? Has there been a misunderstanding?" He stared intently at the finger that Klein had placed on the trigger as he forced a smile. Klein was temporarily unable to determine if he was an accomplice or a neighbor, but he did not reveal any abnormalities. He said in a deep voice, "Do not attempt to resist. Someone will determine if it's a misunderstanding in a while." At that moment, Leonard, who had finished handling the kidnappers, walked out and noticed the man in the stairwell. He said leisurely, "So the kidnappers have another accomplice responsible for buying and delivering food?" Upon hearing this, the man's pupils constricted as he suddenly raised his foot and kicked the bag of bread up in an attempt to block Klein's vision. Seemingly unaffected, Klein coldly pulled the trigger like his usual training. Bang! Blood burst out from the man's left shoulder. He tumbled to the ground and attempted to escape from the second floor. However, Leonard had already reached his hand towards the handrail before leveraging himself to jump over. With a dull thud, Leonard landed on the man from above. The man fainted as Leonard swatted away some of the blood that had splattered on him. He looked up at Klein and chuckled. "Nice shooting. I was trying to hit his legs." The corner of Klein's mouth twitched in an indiscernible manner as he caught a whiff of the smell of blood. He discovered that despite not having any enhancements to his visual, auditory, or tactile senses after consuming the seer potion, he could still see obstructed objects and hear faint footsteps, allowing him to take preemptive judgment. Was this in the scope of spiritual perception? Klein nodded in thought as he watched Leonard find a sharp dagger in the accomplice's possession and drag him into the room. With a gun and cane in each hand, Klein entered the kidnapper's room. They saw Elliot Vickroy jolt awake from the gunshot as he straightened his body and sat up slowly from a huddled position. Leonard had securely tied up the 3 kidnappers with the rope they used against Elliot. Bunched together, they were thrown in a corner. The lack of rope was made up by tearing their clothes. The unconscious man who had been shot in the shoulder was bandaged, but Leonard disdained getting his hands dirty, so he did not help him extract the bullet. "Who are you people?" Elliot stammered in pleasant delight when he saw the scene before him. "Yes, you guessed right. Very precise." The genuflecting Leonard answered casually. "I never expected this bastard to have some humor cells in him." Klein lowered his revolver and said to Elliot, "We are mercenaries hired by your father. You can also call us security personnel." "Phew, for real? Have I been saved?" Elliot said joyfully without daring to make any movements. It was apparent that he had suffered quite harshly in the short few hours of being a kidnapping victim. He did not have the kind of rashness someone his age normally would have. Leonard stood up and said to Klein, "Go downstairs and find some patrolling cops. Get them to inform the tobacco merchant. I do not wish to walk out with a child and 4 idiots like a kidnapper." Klein, who was wondering about the aftermath, nodded. He put away his revolver, picked up his cane, and walked to the staircase. As he went down the stairs, he had a nagging feeling that he had forgotten something. In addition, he heard Leonard say to Elliot, "Don't be nervous. You will soon see your father, mother, and your old butler, Clee. Why don't we play a round of quint?" Klein held back his laughter and walked out into the streets. With the help of pedestrians, he found 2 patrolling policemen. He did not use his badge and identification as a member of the Special Operations Department. Instead, he used his identity as a professional security company and recounted the happenings factually. As for him holding a gun, he was not worried at all. He had received an all-purpose weapon usage certificate the day before yesterday. His application was accelerated by going through internal channels. The 2 policemen exchanged looks and one of them left to gather reinforcements and inform the Vickroy family. The other policeman followed Klein to the kidnapper's room. After waiting for more than 40 minutes, Leonard signaled to Klein while the policeman was not paying attention. Klein was to sneak out of the room with him. "Trust me, heading to the police station is an extreme waste of time. Let's leave first," the Nighthawk with a poetic bearing explained with a relaxed look. Since Leonard was making it clear that he would take any responsibility for any repercussions, he did not retort and followed in tow. Almost 5 minutes later, a few carriages rushed to the building where the kidnappers were. The old butler, Clee, disembarked with his portly master, Vickroy. Up to this moment in time, he was still in a daze. He found it incredulous that news would come so fast. It felt like a dream. Suddenly, he heard a crisp snap as he turned around. A 2-wheeled carriage drove past with its windows open. The black-haired and green-eyed Leonard had snapped his fingers again. After passing by Vickroy's carriage, Leonard closed the window, turned around, and looked at Klein. He extended his right hand and smiled. "It was a pleasure working with you. I don't think we are on that good terms." Klein politely shook his head. He did not expect the kidnapping case to be resolved so quickly. All he could do was marvel at the capabilities of Beyonders. Even though he was just a half-assed Sequence 9 Beyonder, he was able to do many inconceivable things. This is a celebratory gesture of peace among aristocrats after a clash of swords, explained Leonard with a smile. NOVLB //JNN. I know. Klein had many aristocratic classmates. He looked outside the window and said with a frown, shouldn't we confirm with Mr. Klee? If he believes that the police rescued Elliot, our commission will be halved. A total of £100. There was no doubt about their providing of the kidnapper's location from their meeting from before. Don't mind it. To us, money isn't that important, said Leonard with a shrug. It's very important to me. Klein forced a polite smile and said, many poets died early from poverty. Leonard chuckled. I believe Elliot would not lie on this matter. I can tell that he still has some of his innocence left in him. However, you will not get much of the £200 commission either. How much would I get? Asked Klein immediately. As the unspoken rule has always been, half of the commission would be handed to Mrs. Oriana as additional funding for the team. The remaining would be split among members. A pity you aren't a formal member. You will only get about 10% of the remaining half. £10? That isn't bad either. Klein pretended to feel the pinch as he asked, aren't you worried that the kidnappers will realize that they were under the influence of a Beyonder's powers after they wake up? They will not suspect anything. They will only believe that the weather was good and very conducive for sleeping, leading to them dozing off. They will even believe that the song existed only in their dreams. This is something we have verified before, answered Leonard very confidently. Instead, it's your demon hunting bullets that might arouse suspicion. Of course, you being a queer who enjoys mysticism would be a perfectly reasonable explanation. I see. Klein was relieved. He just kept feeling like he had forgotten or overlooked something. After returning to Zutland Street, Klein did not wait for Klee's arrival. He strolled to Welch's place and took a different route home. On the way, he bought some beef and olives for dinner. The meal was enjoyable as always, with the same three siblings chatting idly. However, there was an additional visitor. He was a worker responsible for collecting 1 penny for the gas meter. The evening grew dark as the siblings bade each other good night and returned to their rooms. Klein was sleeping soundly when he was suddenly awoken by something familiar outside. He opened the door in puzzlement and arrived outside the bedroom that no one stayed in. He pushed open the mottled door and saw a grey desk. There was a notebook on the table and its cover was made of hard paper. It was completely black in color. A baffling sense of déjà vu arose in him as he walked over and opened the notebook. The page he flipped open to was of a picture of someone dressed in gorgeous clothes and splendid headdress, the fool. Beneath the fool was a line in Hermes. Everyone will die, including me. Horror gripped Klein's heart as he suddenly realized that the corner of the fool's mouth was curving up. FFFFFFFF. He sat up in shock as he saw crimson moonlight penetrate his curtains. He saw his bookshelf and desk and the silhouette of his own bedroom. He realized that he had had a nightmare. As a seer, he knew what dreams typically portend. Therefore, he began to seriously search through his recollections. Klein froze up when he did because he knew what he had missed out on today. While he was immersed in Leonard's singing, he had sensed a formless and indifferent focus on his back. The feeling of being observed felt different from the usual cogitation or experience he had from using spirit vision. It gave him a sense of déjà vu. According to Captain Dunn, once a feeling of déjà vu arose in him, it probably means. Klein suddenly sat straight and confirmed the feeling. Yes, it's that notebook. That Antigonus family's notebook. The Antigonus notebook is in the apartment across the kidnappers. Although it was very coincidental, Klein believed that his intuition was correct. He immediately got out of bed and rapidly changed out of the old clothes he usually wore to bed. He picked up a white shirt beside him and draped it on, quickly buttoning from top to bottom. 1, 2, 3. He suddenly realized that he was missing buttons. The left and right sides did not seem to match. On careful look, Klein realized that he had made a mistake buttoning the first button, causing the shirt to warp. He shook his head helplessly before taking a deep breath and slowly breathing out, using some of his cogitation techniques to restore his calm. After putting on his white shirt and black trousers, he barely managed to wear his armpit holster steadily. He pulled out the revolver he hid under his soft pillow and holstered it. Without time to tie a bow tie, he draped his formal suit on and with a hat and cane in each hand, he walked to the door. After putting on his half-top hat, Klein gently twisted the door handle and walked into the corridor. He carefully closed his bedroom's wooden door and sneaked downstairs like a thief. He used a fountain pen and paper in the living room to leave a note, informing his siblings that he had forgotten to mention that he had to be early for work today. The moment he was out the door, Klein felt a cool breeze and his entire being calmed down. The street in front of him was dark and silent without any pedestrians. Only the gas lamps illuminated the streets. Klein took out his pocket watch from his pocket and snapped it open. It was just 6 in the morning and the crimson moonlight had not completely faded away. However, there was a hue of sunrise over the horizon. He was just about to seek out an expensive for-hire carriage when he saw a 2-horse, 4-wheeled trackless carriage approaching him. There are public carriages this early in the morning? Klein was puzzled as he went forward and waved for it to stop. Good morning, sir. The carriage driver stopped the horses skillfully. The ticketing officer beside him had his hand to his mouth while yawning. To Zutland Street. Klein scooped out 2 pennies from his pocket and 4 halfpence. 4 pence, the ticketing officer replied without any hesitation. After paying for the ride, Klein got onto the carriage and found it empty. It exuded a clear loneliness amid the dark night. You are the first one, said the carriage driver with a smile. The 2 brown horses widened their pace as they proceeded briskly. To be honest, I never imagined there to be a public carriage so early in the morning. Klein sat near the carriage driver and made idle chatter to divert his attention and relax his tense mind. The carriage driver said in a self-deprecating manner, from 6 in the morning to 9 at night, but all I earn is £1 a week. Are there no breaks? Inquired Klein in bafflement. We take shifts to rest once a week. The carriage driver's tone turned heavy. The ticketing officer beside him added, we are in charge of plying the streets from 6 to 11 in the morning. Following that, we have lunch and an afternoon break. Near dinner time, which is 6 in the evening, we replace our colleagues. Even if we do not need rest, the 2 horses will need it. It wasn't anything like that in the past. There was an accident that should not have happened. Due to fatigue, a carriage driver lost control of his carriage and it toppled. It resulted in us having shifts. Those bloodsuckers would never become this kind so suddenly otherwise. The carriage driver scoffed. Under the illumination of dawn, the carriage drove towards Zutland Street and picked up 7 to 8 passengers on the way. After Klein was less tense, he did not converse further. He closed his eyes and recalled the experiences from yesterday, hoping to notice if he had forgotten anything. By the time the skies were bright when the sun was fully up, the carriage finally arrived at Zutland Street. Klein pressed his hat with his left hand and briskly jumped off the carriage. He quickly stepped into 36 Zutland Street and arrived outside Blackthorn Security Company after going up the flight of stairs. The door was still closed and had yet to open. Klein took out the ring of keys by his waist and found the corresponding brass key and inserted it into the keyhole and twisted it. He pushed forward as the door slowly opened. He saw the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell sniffing at a recently popular cigarette. To be honest, I prefer cigars. You seem to be in a rush, the poet-like Nighthawk asked in a relaxed and cozy manner. Where's Captain? Klein asked instead of answering. Leonard pointed at the partition. He's in the office. As an advanced sleepless, he only needs 2 hours of sleep in the day. I believe it's a potion those factory owners or bankers would like the most. Klein nodded and quickly passed through the partition. He saw that Dunn Smith had opened the door to his office and he was standing at its entrance. What's the matter? Dressed in his black windbreaker, he held a golden-laid cane with a solemn and stern expression. The feeling of déjà vu came to me. It should be the notebook. The Antigonus family's notebook. Klein tried hard to make his answer clear and logical. N/O/vel/b//ind/c//om. Where was that? Dunn Smith's expression did not have any obvious changes. However, Klein's intuition told him that a clear and invisible stir had happened in him. This was possibly a flash of his spirit or a change in his emotions. It's at the place, Leonard, and I saved the hostage yesterday. Opposite the kidnapper's room. I didn't notice it back then until I had a dream and received a revelation. Klein did not conceal anything. From the looks of it, I missed out on making huge contributions. Leonard, who had walked to the partition, chuckled. Dunn nodded slightly as he instructed with a solemn expression, get Kenley to replace old Neil's watch of the armory. Let old Neil and Fry come with us. Leonard stopped acting frivolous as he immediately informed Kenley and Fry who were in the Nighthawk's entertainment room. One of them was a sleepless and the other was a corpse collector. 5 minutes later, the 2-wheeled carriage that came under the jurisdiction of the Nighthawks began driving down the sparse streets in the morning. Leonard wore a feather hat, a shirt and a vest. He stood in as the carriage driver, lashing out a whip from time to time, sending out a crisp crack. Inside the carriage, Klein and old Neil sat on one side. Facing them were Dunn Smith and Fry. The corpse collector's skin was so white it looked like it either had not been under the sun in a very long while or he had a severe blood deficiency. He looked to be in his 30s with black hair and blue eyes. He had a high nose bridge and his lips were very thin. He had a cold and dark demeanor and had a faint smell from often touching corpses. Repeat the situation again in detail. Dunn adjusted the collar of his black windbreaker. Klein stroked the hanging topaz in his sleeve as he began from their mission commissioning until the dream. By the side, old Neil chuckled. Your fate seems to be entwined with that Antigonus family's notebook. I never expected you to meet it in such a manner. That's right. Isn't this too much of a coincidence? Thankfully, Leonard just mentioned that there was no indication of hidden factions of mysterious powers at play from the preliminary investigations of Elliot's kidnapping. It was solely a crime motivated by money. Otherwise, I would really suspect if someone had deliberately arranged for this to happen. Klein found the situation rather curious. It was too coincidental. Dunn did not express his ideas as he was in deep thought. Likewise, corpse collector Fry maintained his silence in his black windbreaker. Only when the carriage stopped at the building mentioned by Klein was the silence broken. Let's go up. Klein, you and old Neil walk behind. Be careful, very careful. Dunn got off the carriage and pulled out a strange revolver with a clearly long and thick barrel. He stuffed it into his right pocket. All right. Klein did not dare take point. After Leonard found someone to watch the carriage, the 5 Beyonders walked orderly into the building. With very light footsteps, they arrived at the 3rd floor. Is this the place? Leonard pointed at the apartment opposite the kidnappers. Klein tapped his glabella twice and activated his spirit vision. In this state, his spiritual perception was enhanced again. He found the door familiar as if he had once entered it before. Yes. He nodded in affirmation. Old Neil also activated his spiritual perception and after observing carefully he said, There's no one inside, nor are there any spiritual glows of magic. Corpse collector Fry added with his hoarse voice, There aren't any evil spirits. He could see many spiritual bodies, including evil spirits and restless wraiths, even without activating his spirit vision. Leonard took a step forward and, like yesterday, punched the door's lock. This time not only did the surrounding wood shatter, even the door lock flew and fell noisily to the ground. Klein seemed to feel an invisible seal instantly vanish. Immediately following that, he caught a whiff of an intense stench. Corpse, a rotting corpse, Fry described coldly. He did not appear to suffer from nausea. Dunn reached out his black-gloved right hand and pushed open the door slowly. The first thing that they saw was a chimney. For early July, there was an abnormal heat emanating the room. In front of the chimney was a rocking chair. Sitting on it was an old woman dressed in black and white. Her head hung low. Her body was abnormally large. Her skin was blackish-green and swollen. It felt like she would explode from a simple prod, spewing a foul rotting stench from within. As maggots and other parasites squirmed between her flesh, blood, and rotting juices or clothes and wrinkles, they appeared like points of light in spirit vision. They seemed to cling close to an extinguished darkness. Pa! Pa! The old woman's eyeballs dropped to the floor and rolled a few times, leaving behind a yellowish-brown streak. Klein felt disgusted and being unable to tolerate the putrid stench any longer, he bent over and puked. Ewa! Ewa! Klein squatted there, vomiting involuntarily. He was soon done with his puking since he did not eat breakfast. At that moment, a tin-colored square flask that looked like a cigarette box appeared in front of him. The mouth which had lost its stopper emitted a mixture of smells akin to tobacco, disinfectant, and mint leaves. It cleared up Klein's nose and rejuvenated him. The pungent smell continued to linger, but Klein no longer felt nauseous. He soon stopped vomiting. He traced the tiny flask up and saw a pale hand that did not seem to belong to a member of the living. He saw the mouth of a black windbreaker's sleeve and saw corpse collector Fry with his cold and dark bearing. Thank you. Klein recovered completely and with his hands on his knees, he stood back up. Fry nodded without any expression. It'll be fine once you are used to it. He put back the flask stopper and put it into his pocket and turned around, walking to the highly decomposed corpse. Without gloves, he began examining the old woman. As for Dunn Smith and Leonard Mitchell, they paced slowly around the room, occasionally touching the table's surface or newspapers. Old Neil pinched his nose and stood outside the door, grumbling in a muffled voice, seriously gross. I'm going to request for additional pay this month. Dunn turned his head over and touched the wall beside the chimney with his gloved right hand. While doing so, he asked Klein, Does this place look familiar? Klein held his breath and constructed the silver pocket watch in his mind to calm down. With him already in his spirit vision state, he immediately felt different. A scene that came from the deepest recesses of his memories flashed past his eyes. Chimney, rocking chair, table, newspapers, the rusty nails on the door, the tin cans inlaid with silver. The scenes were dark and dull, like a documentary from Earth. However, it was even more blurry and illusory. The scene quickly stacked against what Klein was seeing. The feelings of déjà vu and having been here before presented themselves clearly. An illusory and ethereal scream seemed to pass through invisible walls. Hornacis. Phlegria. Hornacis. Phlegria. Hornacis. Phlegria. It feels a little familiar. Klein answered honestly while his brain felt a stabbing pain. Thankfully, he quickly tapped his glabella twice. Hornacis. The Hornacis mountain range that appeared in original Klein's diary? That is content that was deciphered from the Antigonus family's notebook. The murmurs were very similar to one of the previous ones. It involved the word Hornacis. Is this a form of enticement? Klein was gripped by shock as he did not dare think deeper, afraid that he would place himself on the trajectory of losing control. Dunn nodded slightly and walked to a cupboard. He suddenly reached out his hand and pulled open its wooden door. The bread inside was moldy and there were about 7 gray, stiff dead rats. Leonard, go downstairs to get patrolling cops and explain the situation here, instructed Dunn. All right. Leonard turned and left the apartment. Following that, Dunn opened the door to 2 other bedrooms and did a careful search. After being certain that there were no clues as well as any sign of the Antigonus family's notebook, Fry also stood up. He wiped his hands with a white handkerchief he brought along with him and said, "The time of death was more than 5 days ago. There are no external injuries nor are there any clear signs that it was a result of beyonder powers. The exact cause of death will require a postmortem. Did you discover anything?" Dunn turned to look at Old Neil and Klein. The two who were no longer in spirit vision state shook their heads in unison. Apart from the corpse, everything else is normal. Actually, no, there was an invisible energy sealing the apartment in the beginning. As you know, there will usually be similar processes when we use ritualistic magic, Old Neil thought for a few seconds before adding. Dunn was just about to say something when he looked outside the door. A few seconds later, Klein and Old Neil sensed something and turned to look at the stairwell. A few seconds later, faint footsteps grew louder as Leonard walked up with a policeman. The policeman's expression changed once he caught the noxious smell. He immediately cooperated with his colleague from the Special Operations Department and began knocking on the doors of the residents on the 2nd floor to gain an understanding of the situation on the 3rd floor. Moments later, the corporal with his 2 silver chevrons looked at the corpse on the rocking chair. Katie Stefania Bieber. Between 55 and 60 years old. Widow. Has rented this apartment with her son, Ray Bieber, for more than 10 years. Her husband was formerly a gem artisan. Her son is about 30 years old and is single. He inherited his father's trade and earns about £1.15 a week. According to their neighbors, they have not seen them in more than a week. Before the policeman continued, Klein already knew the critical point that followed. Missing. To be more precise, it was unknown where Ray Bieber had gone to. The ancient notebook could very well be on him. NOV.LB//JNN. Do you have a picture of Ray Bieber? Dunn looked at the police officer. He was acting as the role of a high-ranking inspector. However, it was not really acting since he was indeed a high-ranking inspector on the police department's roster. His salary and various allowances were also paid according to his rank. Of course, it did not include his salary from the church. The police officer shook his head nervously and said, "I'm not sure. I'll have to return to the station to search for it. It's not typical for us to have pictures of every single person." Got it. Continue questioning the residents on the 1st floor. Ask them in detail. Dunn gave the order. As he watched the police officer leave, he closed the door and turned to Old Neil. "I'll leave the rest to you. If not, we will have to make all the residents sleep and obtain Ray Bieber's looks. Yeah, I don't really trust sketches based on verbal descriptions." Old Neil nodded. He took out a few thumb-sized bottles from a pocket in his black classic robe and scattered the liquids in a particular order. Immediately following that, he pulled out a clump of powder and scattered it in a circle around him. Strangely, a biting smell spread and was not influenced by the nauseating smells in the room. Klein also suddenly noticed that there was an invisible force field around him. It separated him from the environment and everyone else. It was like the room in its previous state. Old Neil half closed his eyes as his lips mumbled a soft and indiscernible incantation. Without being prepared, Klein vaguely heard the words, "Goddess, give me strength, we look forward to the protection of the night." Hum. A sudden wind tore through the windows and blew up the powder. Klein's heart quaked suddenly as he felt goosebumps all over him. He found it difficult to describe. A terrifying smell that made him afraid of looking directly spread rapidly. He was confused as he tensed up, unable to relax. It felt as though he had plunged into a state similar to what one would have after working on a highly advanced mathematical problem. Suddenly, Old Neil's eyes opened, his eyes pitch black. He took out a fountain pen from his pocket and began drawing on a piece of scrap paper on the table. He was so fast that his entire body was trembling. Klein focused his gaze and saw a face with recessed eyes and a tall nose bridge rapidly appear. When the natural curly short hair was done, old Neil wrote a single line beneath the portrait. Black hair, deep blue eyes. Left of his mouth is a fully ceramic tooth implant. Pada. The fountain pen in old Neil's hand fell onto the paper as his body convulsed a few times. This is the image of Ray Bieber according to what's left in the room. Old Neil whispered as the color of his eyes restored rapidly. Then, he turned back to his original spot and slowly circled it. The invisible force field that isolated things immediately dissipated in the form of a breeze. Praise the lady. Old Neil tapped his chest in 4 spots, forming the shape of the crimson moon. Klein's taut nerves relaxed as he made more acute observations. He discovered that there was nothing special about Ray Bieber's facial features. He had a relatively mild bearing. The only thing was that his philtrum sagged clearly. I'll try using dowsing rod seeking. He picked up the portrait and found male clothes in the bedroom and spread them onto the ground. Dunn, Leonard, and old Neil did not stop him as they watched him place the black cane above the clothes and portrait. Fry was as silent as always. Klein's eyes turned from brown to black as he finished his recitation, only to release his grip. The black cane stood silently like it was embedded in the ground. Ray Bieber's location. Klein silently repeated to himself again. With the sound of humming wind, the cane fell down but kept changing directions while falling. Finally, it began spinning in slight circles. Without any external help, the black cane stood stably again. Klein repeated a few times with the same outcome. All he could do was shake his head at Dunn and old Neil. A strange power was interfering with his divination. Dunn took off his black glove and said to Leonard and Klein, "Take Ray Bieber's portrait and inquire the residence for a final confirmation. Following that, we will issue a warrant of arrest against him for the murder of his mother." "All right." Klein held his cane and bent down to pick the portrait. After the neighbors confirmed that the portrait was indeed Ray Bieber, Dunn instructed Leonard and the police officer to finish the procedures at the station. He and Fry headed to a few bars in Tingen City to seek help via other means. Klein and old Neil returned to Blackthorn Security Company on a public carriage. It was not even 8 by the time they arrived. Roseanne had not even clocked in. After closing the door, Klein cocked his head at old Neil and, hoping to learn and answer his questions, asked him, "Why would I send the Antigonus family's notebook to Ray Bieber's home?" This was completely in a different direction from Iron Cross Street where Welch stayed. Old Neil walked to the sofa and chuckled. "Isn't that obvious? Who knows what powers inside the notebook you invoked? Maybe you did some described ritual out of curiosity and ended up provoking a strange existence that you should not have. The motive of this existence was to have the notebook sent to Ray Bieber and sever all clues, to prevent anyone from discovering it. Therefore, apart from you who were selected, Welch and Naya committed suicide. Regarding you, to be frank, I still have no idea how you survived. I would like to know too." Klein sat down as well as he deliberately replied with a wry smile. "I've also thought of the guesses you have of the proceedings. However, there's one thing I don't understand. Why did I have to hand the notebook to Ray Bieber?" Old Neil shrugged and said, "Perhaps his life path number 1 matches the requirements, or maybe he's one of the last remaining descendants of the Antigonus family. In short, there are too many possibilities. And why the notebook was sold to Tingen City would have similar reasons. I do not think it's because he's a descendant." Klein suddenly felt enlightened before he sighed. "Unfortunately, I did not discover immediately that Ray Bieber and that notebook have vanished." Old Neil laughed. "This is something that Dunn has to worry about. As for you, it's something good." "Why do you say so?" Klein frowned in puzzlement. Old Neil rubbed his temples and said, "I believe we have a general idea of why the 3 of you engaged in a mass suicide. That notebook is also now purportedly in Ray Bieber's hands. Furthermore, the matter has already been exposed. Regardless of whether you are alive or dead, it will hardly influence any subsequent developments. I believe that the surreptitious existence or mysterious power that caused all of this will not pay you any special attention. It's just like how you would not pay attention to the ants on the ground. Heh, as long as you do not try to make him recall you. And our arrest warrant for Ray Bieber will quickly reach the secret order. They will also be able to guess that it is related to the Antigonus family's notebook. Believe me, for a secret organization that has been in existence for more than 1,000 years, it has many channels of information. Therefore, their focus will be diverted to Ray Bieber's whereabouts, in a bid to find the notebook before us. They will not, nor is it possible for them to harass, stalk, or deal with you. Lad, congratulations on stepping out from the shadows of the past. What follows will be a brand new journey filled with sunlight." Klein nodded when he heard that as he said in a happy and relieved manner, "I hope so." Having transmigrated here, he had been enveloped in uncertainty. Now, it felt like it had finally dissipated. However, Klein was still feeling uncertain because the notebook seemed to be tied to him in a certain manner. It went to the point of him bumping into remnant clues coincidentally from a normal mission of rescuing a hostage. He was afraid that there would come a day when a delivery man would send him a parcel, only to realize that it was that Antigonus family notebook after opening it up. Let's hope everything will go as old Neil described. He silently prayed. When old Neil heard his reply, he immediately scoffed. You don't seem to be a devout believer of the goddess. At this moment, shouldn't you be drawing the sign of the crimson moon at your chest and say, "May goddess bless us"? Mr. Neil, you don't seem like one either. A real devotee would not say what follows will be a brand new journey filled with sunlight. Having been studying mysticism under old Neil, Klein had established a decent friendship with him, so he did not stand on ceremony to return a sarcastic remark. Both of them locked eyes and chuckled with great rapport. At the same time, they tapped their chests 4 times. Praise the lady. At that moment, they heard the grinding sounds of machinery as the main door to Blackthorn Security Company opened. The elegant Mrs. Oriana with her fashionably coiled hair stepped into the reception hall with a light green dress. Good morning, Mr. Neil. Good morning, Klein. She held a small leather handbag as she greeted with a smile. It's another fabulous day today. A pretty good day. Good morning, Oriana. You are still as beautiful as 10 years ago, replied old Neil with a chuckle. Oriana's eyes turned to slits as she upturned her face. Mr. Neil, the way you praise is still as infuriating as 10 years ago. She enunciated the words, 10 years. Is that so? Old Neil looked at Klein confused. He wore a perplexed look. Never mention anything that will remind the ladies of their age. As a keyboard warrior that knew a little of everything, Klein instantly understood what had peeved Mrs. Oriana. He smiled lightly and said, Good morning, Mrs. Oriana. You are as beautiful as always. Thank you, our outstanding Koei University graduate. Oriana smiled with a nod before saying, That old butler has already paid the mission's commission. According to captain's rules, half of it will be used as additional funds, while the other half will be split between you and Leonard. But since you aren't a formal member, you can only take 10% of the half. Come over later to sign for it. How much did he pay? Klein asked happily while also feeling the pinch. £200. This was what he said back then, Lord, the esteemed Storm. I never imagined or believed that this was resolved just like that. This is even harder than us having a dream. Why is your security company so unknown? It's an insult to the entire industry. Mrs. Oriana mimicked the old butler's southern accent. Klein thought seriously for a few seconds before saying humorously, This is just too unfair for those kidnappers. 2 Beyonders had resolved the problem quickly using methods that could be described as easy and pleasant. This is like an adult bullying a few kids while in full combat attire. They were just too unlucky. They must have lost the protection of the divine, said Oriana with a soft laugh. I told the butler that we were only lucky. One of our informants happened to see the kidnappers bring the child into the hideout. Therefore, do not have too much hopes for us. We really are just a very ordinary security company. Typically speaking, the more you emphasize something is ordinary, the more extraordinary it is. Klein lampooned with a smile. He watched Mrs. Oriana walk through the partition and enter the accounting room. Old Neil puckered his lips by the side and said enviously, You really are a lucky lad. You haven't joined us for long and you've encountered a job worth £200. Is that very rare? Klein asked in puzzlement. Prior to this, he was either studying history or mysticism, or wandering aimlessly outside, hoping to find clues with his spiritual perception. According to Oriana's accounts, we might not encounter a single job an entire week. And most jobs are worth less than £20. Old Neil rubbed the moonstone by his wrist and sighed. Following that, he looked at Klein with anticipation. If you encounter any similar jobs in the future, remember to inform me. Upon hearing old Neil's words, Klein suddenly felt a strange feeling arise in him. Therefore he asked directly, Mr. Neil, you seem to be lacking in money. How much do you get paid a week? If you aren't comfortable telling me, just ignore my question. Old Neil leaned back into the sofa and chuckled. This isn't something that needs hiding. I've been here for so many years. At present, I will obtain salaries from both the church and the police department every week, a total of £12. A weekly salary of £12? Klein blurted out in surprise. A weekly salary of £12 with 52 weeks a year, that meant more than £600 a year. Back when he read the Tianjin Morning Post and Honest Paper, they had mentioned that high-profile lawyers only earned £800 to £1,000 a year. And those were the best lawyers. As for the managers of Benson's trading company, they only earned £6 a week. That was already quite a decent job. Yes, such a salary is actually quite generous, and we do not need to pay any taxes, added old Neil with a smile. Klein had heard from Benson that one had to pay E-type taxes when their weekly salaries exceeded £1. In other words, the government and corporate employees had to pay 3% of taxes if they earned £1 to £2, 5% for £2 to £5, 10% for £5 to £10, and 15% for £10 to £20, capping at 20% for those above £20. N/O/vel/b//ind/c//om. Other than that, he also read of 4 other kinds of taxes on the newspapers. A-type was related to land, housing, and other earnings for material items. It included property and rent. B-type was a tax paid by farmers. C-type was a tax on profits from bonds, funds, and equities. D-type was commercial, finance, or professional income. It's something admirable. Klein echoed Old Neil. However, Old Neil shook his head. Such a salary is insufficient for beyonders like us who have to frequently study the hidden mysteries, practice and attempt rituals. Aren't materials obtainable via application? Asked Klein in puzzlement.
Old Neil scoffed.
There's a limitation to it. At times, we have to give a sufficient legitimate reason. If you want to learn more and experiment in the field of mysticism, you can only spend your own dime to buy materials. It can be bought internally or at underground markets. Klein jolted in surprise as he immediately asked, "There are beyonder materials that are sold in underground markets? I thought the churches would not permit their existence." He was lacking in means to obtain materials. With him having a mysterious organization in its nascent stages, he could not always have them settled via the Nighthawks, right? There's no way to control such matters. Yeah, from the viewpoint of mysticism, all beings are sentient with their spirits and they stem from the same source. The materials we use are not limited to those extraordinary creatures. It also comes from ordinary animals, plants, and minerals. For example, the poison hemlock, gold mint leaves, and night vanilla in the bottle of seer potion. They are items we can encounter frequently in our daily lives. They might not have any extraordinary characteristics, but they have special characteristics. Through concoction and blending, they will derive certain effects. Therefore, this is not a trade that the church can ban, explained Old Neil in detail. Without waiting for Klein to say a word, he continued, besides, it's not only the core of extraordinary beings that are of use. For example, the Lavos squid. Apart from its blood, its eyeballs, skin, and tentacles are pretty good materials. Unless the church captures it entirely with its own manpower, to completely corner and control any outflows would be a tremendous financial burden. The lower the grade of the extraordinary material, the more it is so. They can only do their best to prevent the more special materials from flowing out. Old Neil suddenly laughed. There's another important reason. It's better to know of an underground market than not knowing of it. Under the premise that secret organizations have not been fully eliminated, this is a pretty good strategy. Besides, it can help us obtain materials we are lacking. Of course, with the existence of such markets, contraband items will appear. As long as it's not something ridiculous or overly dangerous, we will turn a blind eye to it. At most, we would use them to enrich our vaults. Is it because the few large churches put each other in place, so no one can take excessive action? Klein guessed. Old Neil acknowledged tersely but did not elaborate.
I'm a seer.
In the future, I'll definitely need to practice and will need more materials. Mr. Neil, can you take me to the underground market to have a look? Klein requested with a valid reason. Old Neil appeared to be placed in a difficult position. In fact, those guys who are active in those places are mostly not beyonders. Some of them might be aristocrats that like mystery or rich people who have inclinations towards mysticism.
All right.
I have a £30 bill that needs paying soon. It wouldn't be convenient for me to head over there for the time being. All right. Klein never expected the reason to be Old Neil's owing of money. Moments later, he said with deliberation, "Mr. Neil, do you need me to lend you money? I just earned a commission of £10.
Haha, there's no need.
I'll be able to settle it." Old Neil patted the sofa and slowly stood up. Sigh, age is truly an enemy that biological creatures can't fight. I'm exhausted from last night's watch. Yeah, revise what I've taught you later this morning. Read more documents. Tomorrow, I'll teach you the foundations of ritualistic magic.
All right.
Klein got up and bade him farewell by taking off his hat. When Captain Dunn did not return at noon, Klein pretended that he was still searching for the notebook as he roamed the streets again. Having earned £10, he no longer needed to wait for the next disbursement of the funds. He could head directly to the Divination Club. Cogitation and spirit vision have been occasionally producing murmurings and illusions. It made him eager to begin acting, in the Divination Club situated at the second floor of 13 House Street, North Borough of Tingen City. Klein saw the beautiful lady that attended to visitors once again. She was still having her brownish-yellow long hair coiled, making her look mature and elegant. It was hard to tell her age. "Hello, Mr. Glassy isn't here today. Would you like to change fortune tellers today?" said the beautiful lady with a smile. Upon hearing that, Klein, who had just taken off his silk hat and put it back on, was immediately surprised. "You still remember me? That was already 5 days ago." The woman puckered her lips into a smile. "You are the first customer that sought Mr. Glassy's services. You are also the only one to this very day. It's hard for me not to have a deep impression of you." Was this the image of him being penny-wise, pound-foolish? Klein lampooned himself as he deliberated a question. When was the last time Mr. Glassy came to the club? The lady shot a glance at him and answered seemingly in recollection. "To be honest, we are unable to grasp when our members will come and go. They have their free will and personal matters to tend to." "Well, I do believe that Mr. Glassy hasn't come to the club since he told your fortune that day. I wish him the best of luck. May the goddess bless him." Klein prayed and did not ask further. Instead, he asked with a smile, "I'm not here for divination services this time. I plan to join the club." "Really? That's our pleasure." The lady expressed a timely look of surprised delight. "For the first year as a member, the membership fee is £5. It will be £1 a year thereafter. I believe there's no need for me to describe in the details again." Klein took out a £5 note he recently received as he watched Henry Augustus I's portrait depart him. After seriously checking the anti-counterfeit watermark, the woman stored away the note seriously and handed a form to Klein. "Please fill in your detailed information. Let me prepare the receipt for you." "There's a receipt? You should bill it to Blackthorn Security Company." Klein was amused by his own thoughts as he picked up a fountain pen on the desk. With the blackish-blue ink, he filled in his name, age, address, and company information. However, he had deliberately left his date of birth empty. To a seer, that provided profound mysteries about his body through his life path number. After receiving the receipt and finishing his registration as a member, the lady extended her right hand. "Congratulations on joining Tingen City's Divination Club. I'm Angelica Barhart, your hard-working server. This is your member cufflinks. There are special inscriptions on them which will identify you as a member." "Hello, Madam Angelica." Klein shook her hand and took the dark gold cufflinks. He realized that the special inscription was written with the root word for fortune teller in Hermes. Angelica retracted her left hand and thought for a few seconds. "Might I ask what divination arts you are most familiar with? Or would you prefer to learn some divination methods from the club? We will consider inviting famous fortune tellers of the corresponding domain to give classes. We will also introduce you members with similar expertise so that you can have a good time interacting with them. I know a bit of every divination art. There's no need to give me any special considerations." Klein replied with some embellishments. In addition, he inquired, "Can I begin telling the fortunes of others? I'm not a total rookie." He was here to act as a seer and not learn the divination methods ordinary people could learn. Angelica maintained a polite smile as she said, "You can tell the fortunes of people anytime in the club. However, before we confirm your skills, we will not promote you when our customers ask. How much do you plan on charging for your fortune telling?"
2 pence.
Klein decided to gain at advantage with price while he was still unknown. "We will go by the standard of taking an eighth, so we will be taking a quarter pence for fees." Angelica repeated the various rules first before writing Klein's information into the fortune teller album which customers could choose from. After all of this was done, she pointed at the meeting room at the far end of the corridor with a smile. "Mr. Hannes Vincent is currently explaining astrolabe divination. You can find a quiet spot to listen in. You can also raise your questions if there are any queries."
"All right."
Klein walked toward the meeting room with his interest piqued. He wanted to know the differences between what Hannes Vincent and old Neil said. At that moment, Angelica chased up and whispered, "Mr. Moretti, would you want coffee or tea? We provide Psy Black tea, Southville coffee and Desi coffee." Klein, who had been reading the papers regularly, knew that these coffees and black tea were considered as one of the inferior varieties, but he also knew that they were definitely of better quality than the ones he had at home. After some thought, he said, "A cup of Southville coffee. 3 teaspoons of sugar without milk please." Lone Kingdom Southville was famous for its beer and red wine. Many important figures were fond of them. However, their coffee was relatively unknown. "All right, I'll send it to you in a bit." Angelica pointed towards the meeting room. Klein slowly walked to the half-closed door and heard a voice in a thick Awa accent explaining, "Astrolabe divination is a relatively more complex one among the divination arts. But that's only for ordinary people." Klein silently tagged on a sentence for the speaker. He saw about 5 tables placed in a circle inside the meeting room. It surrounded a middle-aged man in a black classic robe, Jonas Vincent. The gentleman had obvious dark circles. His brown hair was thick and hard. Each strand stood firmly like a porcupine's spikes. Apart from that, there was nothing unique about him. Upon seeing Klein enter, Jonas Vincent nodded gently without stopping his class. He only slowed down his speech. Klein had one hand in his pocket while the other held his cane. He found a seat to the sides and sat down, leaning back comfortably in the process. He scanned the circle of 6 members.
There were 4 men and 2 women.
Some of them were attentively taking notes, whispering, or returning Klein a rueful smile. After placing his cane down, Klein adjusted his half-top hat and tapped his glabella twice in the process. He cast his gaze at Jonas and saw the different colors, brightness and thickness of his aura.
Dark red.
He's a little worried. Actually, every other part of his body is healthy except that part. I wonder what's wrong. Klein listened to the class while muttering to himself. At that moment, he clasped his right hand and covered his mouth to prevent his laughter from sounding. He suddenly felt like he was a quack. He was rather pleased with his spirit vision ability. Although he could only make a general judgment and not the details, it was enough to gain him many useful information. After surveying his surroundings, he tapped his glabella twice again as though he was pondering over what Jonas had just said. N/O/vel/b//ind/c//om. Astrolabe divination was one of the astromancy divination methods. However, ordinary people could also attempt to interpret things. For instance, the most basic birth horoscope was to determine the inquirer's fate by determining the positions of the sun, moon, blue and red stars at their birth, the corresponding spots in the sky, matching the representative symbols to the astrolabe, and the corresponding situations of the different constellations. This required the fortune teller to be able to calculate the states of the planets and constellations, which was rather complicated. Of course, there were publications that aided people to look up the values. Some even simplified it by making a vague read with just the constellations. Klein listened silently without interjecting or asking any questions. From time to time, he would caress the hanging topaz at his sleeve or take a sip of the Southville coffee which Angelica had brought in. After some time, Jonas rubbed his glabella and said, "Perhaps you will need to attempt at creating your own astrolabe. Ask me if you have any questions. I will be in Moonstone." After he left, a young man in a white shirt and black vest got up with a smile and walked to Klein's side. "Nice to meet you. I'm Edward Steve."
My pleasure.
"I'm Klein Moretti." Klein stood up and returned the bow. "Astrolabes are too complicated. Every time I hear about it, I can't help but doze off," said Edward self-deprecatingly. Klein grinned and said, "That's because Mr. Vincent can't help but pass the knowledge he grasps to us. It's like giving us an Intis feast. It's just indigestible. I'd be able to finish the Intis feast. They usually use a huge plate to serve tiny bits of food." Edward chuckled and sat up. He asked out of curiosity, "Are you new?" "I've not seen you in the 2 years I was here." "I just joined the club today," answered Klein frankly.
What are you good at?
"I'm best at tarot and poker divination," Edward casually asked. "I know a little of everything, but just a little." Klein gave a description he used to give himself. He was not being modest since there was just too much mysterious knowledge he had not grasped in the domain of divination. Just as the other members were thinking of talking about horoscope divination, Angelica walked into the meeting room. "Mr. Steve, someone wants you to tell their fortunes."
All right.
Edward stood up with a smile. "I can tell you are an excellent fortune teller," said Klein as he looked at him. "No, it's because my price is most suitable," said Edward with a soft chortle. "When ordinary people come to have their fortunes told, they will absolutely not choose the most expensive ones. And unless they had their heads kicked by asses, they would definitely not be choosing the cheapest few. It's easiest to gain opportunities if you are in the middle. I'm one of those that had their heads kicked by asses." When he saw Edward leave, Klein suddenly shook his head with a wry smile. "It seems the price I set is problematic." He stood up, picked up his cane, and left the meeting room. He found Angelica again. "I wish to change the prices of my divination. Set it to 8 pence. Angelica took a deep look at him and said, "We will satisfy your request, but we will also tell customers that you only recently joined the club."
No problem.
Klein did not mind as he nodded. At times, mystery was also an important element for a seer to attract customers. After changing his details, Klein returned to the meeting room. At that moment, he saw Jonas Vincent walk out of Moonstone. He held a silver-coated mirror. This well-known fortune teller said to the 5 members in the meeting room, "I recently learned a new divination art. Magic mirror divination. Does anyone want to learn?" Magic mirror divination?
That's not safe.
Klein paused outside the meeting room and frowned. As a seer who had just stepped through the gates of mysticism, Klein did not dare to claim he knew much. However, he was certain he knew more than ordinary people. He was aware that the various kinds of divination arts could be split into 3 categories based on particular standards. And that standard was based on the source of the revelation. The first category of divination included tarot, poker, pendulums, dowsing canes, and dreams. By using the inquirer's own spirituality and its communication with the spirit world to gain a revelation, it could be interpreted for an answer. However, spirit pendulums and dowsing canes had very high requirements of one's spirituality, spirit body, and astral projection. Non-beyonders were unable to obtain precise or clear revelations. Card divination provided fixed symbolism, presenting even an average person's faint revelation. Dreams were somewhere in between the other forms. The second category included spirit numerology and astromancy, as well as their derived forms. The fortune teller used either the personal details of the inquirer, or changes in nature before using calculations, inference, and interpretation to answer their questions. With this method, the initiative did not lie in the inquirer, but the fortune teller. The third category used an external third party, separate from the inquirer and the fortune teller. The Ouija boards that Klein was familiar with from his previous life belonged in this category. They used rituals to ask for a direct answer from the unknown or the supernatural. Even though there was a high chance that an average person would not succeed, there were cases where they managed to communicate with malicious spirits or entities that drove them to insanity. These methods of divination usually led to tragedies. The magic mirror divination that Hannes Vincent mentioned belonged to the third category. In mysticism, mirrors were connected to the unknown and mystery, like they were the doors of the spiritual world. Thus, Klein stopped outside the meeting room, intending to learn how the famous fortune teller would explain the divination. Klein wanted to ascertain if he needed to inform the captain or not, raiding him at night. Of course, there was a safe way to do the magic mirror divination. One could ask for answers from the 7 orthodox divinities. Even if it was very difficult for an ordinary person to receive any real revelations, they would not be in any danger or suffer any after effects. The magic mirror divinations that were strictly controlled by the Nighthawks and mandated punishers were those that asked evil gods or mysterious existences for help. Furthermore, the fortune teller couldn't randomly fabricate things. Some phrases or qualities had the potential to invite the attention of unknown entities. In the world where the powers of the beyonders exist, such divinations would often lead to tragedy. Klein even suspected that the original Klein, Welch, and Naya had committed such a forbidden divination by following the instructions of the Antigonus family's diary. At that moment, Hannes also explained the principle behind magic mirror divination and described the actual process. First, you choose a suitable time and date according to the divinity you believe in. You can decide this using the astromancy manual. For example, we all know that Sundays symbolize the Evernight goddess, for Sunday is the embodiment of rest. 2 to 3 in the early morning, 9 to 10 in the morning, 4 to 5 in the evening, and 11 to midnight are all related to the moon. Thus, they are controlled by the Evernight goddess. Thus, fortune tellers that pray to the Evernight goddess can use magic mirror divination during these times on a Sunday.
Quite a good foundation.
Klein nodded slightly while using the half-closed door to the meeting room to conceal himself. It had to be said that with the 7 major churches keeping each other in check, some mysticism knowledge had indeed leaked. For example, many of the meanings behind the symbolism could be found in the astromancy manual. However, without the potions or beyonder powers, ordinary people were unable to obtain the desired effects. Second, we must scrutinize the mirror carefully. It must be a mirror coated with silver. You place the mirror at the position representing the moon. Hannes demonstrated with the prop in his hand. No, what he needs now is spirit dowsing. First, choose a position and recite the phrase, "This place is suitable for magic mirror divination," 7 times in your head, then see which direction the pendulum turns. Clockwise for true, counterclockwise for false. Of course, if you are asking for answers from a malicious supernatural entity, the position would not matter. Rather, it would depend on whether the entity is interested in answering your questions. Klein silently corrected him. At this point, he felt like a teacher listening in on a lesson. Hannes Vincent could not hear Klein's mental musings as he described the preparations in detail in a normal tone. When the members finished taking notes, he continued explaining, "After showering, confirm that you have drawn all your curtains and locked your doors. After that, light up a candle and place it in front of the mirror before sincerely praying to the divinity you believe in. Try to keep your questions simple as there's no need for fanciful embellishment. After praying 7 times, pick up your mirror and gently toss it on the ground.
Make sure to be gentle.
Remember the way it shatters, as that is a revelation from the gods. I will tell you the main symbolisms in a second. Phew, this is orthodox magic mirror divination." Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he walked into the meeting room and sat back down in his previous seat. He finished the rest of his Southville coffee in one gulp. So-called orthodox divination meant that it was possible to obtain revelations, but it was impossible to truly interpret it. And for beyonders who reached this step, they could look straight into the mirror to obtain clear information if they received a response. As there were many potential symbolisms after the shattering, Hanas taught for a long while. He was not done even when Edward Steve returned to the room after finishing his fortune-telling. Klein did not ask what Edward did for his fortune-telling or what method did he use, since it was an unspoken rule among fortune-tellers. While acting as a seer, he naturally had to abide by it strictly unless the other party mentioned it. I discovered that many a time, our interpretation is too vague, as though it's meeting different requests, allowing different people to find a description of themselves from the interpretation. Edward drank a mouthful of black tea and said with a soft sigh. For example, those that encounter adversities and calamities will eventually see the light of hope. But no one knows when the light of hope will come. For example, a journey might not be very smooth sailing, but you will definitely arrive alive. The dead will not retort me. As he did not listen from the beginning, he ignored Hannes's magic mirror divination class. Survival bias, added Klein with a smile. Survival bias generally meant that a lot of statistics would only include those who were alive and lucky. The data would ignore the dead, therefore, the results would be clearly biased. Right. Emperor Roselle was really a philosopher, marveled Edward. Speechless, Klein raised his empty cup and pretended to take a sip. The members were fully immersed in the study of horoscopes and magic mirror divination the entire afternoon. Occasionally, they would also discuss with Klein and Edward. And when that happened, Klein would try his best to meet his duty as an informal member of the Nighthawks. He would try hard to steer the topic away from anything related to beyonders or dangerous ideas. However, he failed at the thing he wanted to do the most. A few inquirers came, but none of them picked him to do their fortune-telling. Perhaps I have to be more proactive in entertaining them. Should I use a few phrases like, "You are plagued with bad luck," "You have been unlucky recently," or "Nothing you do will happen smoothly"? No, that's nothing like a seer. With this in mind, Klein could not help but shake his head in self-deprecation. He picked up his cane, stood up, and left after bidding everyone farewell. At 5:30, Edward Steve put on his coat and was prepared to walk out the divination club when he suddenly saw a familiar figure. "Good afternoon, Glassy. Long time no see," he greeted with a smile. He saw his friend with similar interests as him wear his usual format suit with a black bow tie. In front of his chest hung a monocle. Immediately following that, he noticed that his friend did not look well. Even his soft blonde hair looked dry. "Good afternoon, Edward." Cough. Glassy, with his hat in hand, suddenly used his fist to cover his mouth as he coughed a few times. Edward asked out of concern, "You seem to be ill?" "A very serious illness. It even turned into pneumonia. If it wasn't for my wife, who met an impressive apothecary and gave me a magical medicine, you would have probably had to visit me at the cemetery." Glassy's tone was filled with a lingering fear and joy. "Lord, I can't believe it. You were so healthy previously. Look at you, you look so frail now. I remember when I did divination on you, there were no signs that indicated that you would get a serious illness." Edward waved his cane and said with an astonished sigh, "My own divination had the same result as yours. Perhaps we are not qualified fortune-tellers." Besides, Glassy suddenly recalled the happenings on Monday as his expression turned abnormally serious. N/O/vel/b//in.c//om. At that moment, the beautiful lady Angelica came over and bowed with a pleasant smile. After exchanging greetings, she first showed concern for Glassy's health and provided some suggestions. Then, she mentioned in passing, "Mr. Glassy, Mr. Moretti, who requested your divination services previously, has joined our club as well. The one who got me to tell his fortune." Glassy's eyes lit up immediately. "Lord, where is he?"
He just left.
Angelica and Edward were unable to comprehend Glassy's abnormal reaction. Glassy took 2 steps in agitation and said, "The next time he comes, please ask him when he will come if I'm not around." "Glassy, what happened? Did that Mr. Klein Moretti do something to you?" asked Edward in puzzlement. Glassy raised his arm and stared straight into Edward's and Angelica's probing gazes. He said in excitement, "He's a very, very, very magical." He lowered his arm and said after using very thrice, "Doctor." 7:30 in the evening, around the Moretti family's dining table. "Klein, why do you need to be at work so early as a consultant? Would emergency matters at the security company be more dangerous?" Benson forked a potato from a dish of potato-stewed beef as he raised the matter in concern. Klein carefully spat out the bones from a pan-fried dish and gave his prepared answer. n/o/vel/b/jnd/c/om. A batch of historical documents needed immediate shipping to Backlund. I had to be present to handle the handover and make sure there was nothing missing. As you can guess, the bunch of fist-swinging bastards don't know any FASAC. Upon hearing his answer, Benson, who had finished chewing his food, could not help but sigh. Knowledge is truly important. Making use of this opportunity, Klein took out the remaining £5 note and handed it to Benson. This is my additional payment I received today. It's time you get some decent clothes too.
£5.
Benson and Melissa said in unison. Benson took the note and looked at it repeatedly. He said in both shock and doubt, "This security company sure is generous." His weekly salary was £1.10 solely, which meant £6 exactly every 4 weeks. He only earned £1 additional from this additional payment. And with that salary, he had managed to support his siblings, giving them a decent place to stay and allowing them to eat meat 2 to 3 times a week. Every year, they could get a few new clothes. "Are you doubting me?" Klein deliberately returned with a question.
Benson chuckled.
"I doubt you have the ability nor the guts to rob a bank. You aren't someone who can lie," Melissa answered seriously after lowering her fork and knife. "I am now someone used to lying." Klein immediately felt a little ashamed. Although it was a result of the circumstances of his reality, his sister's belief in him left him melancholic. It was relatively urgent and important today. "I also played a crucial role, which is the reason for the £5, Klein explained. In a way, what he said was the truth. As for the £5 that he would be reimbursed with, the one he would use to join the divination club, he planned on concealing it. Firstly, if he brought £5 home again, he would truly scare his siblings, making them suspect he was doing something illegal. Secondly, he had to save to buy additional materials to practice being a seer and to grasp more mysticism knowledge. Benson bit off a mouthful of wheat bread in satisfaction and thought for more than 10 seconds. "The work I'm at doesn't need any decent clothes. Well, to be precise, the clothes at home are sufficient." Without waiting for Klein to persuade him, he suggested, "With this additional income, we would truly have savings. I plan on buying a few books on accountancy and studying." Klein, Melissa, "I do not wish that my weekly salary remain below £2 in 5 years. As you know, my boss and manager have shit for brains. Their mouths stink the moment they open them."
Excellent idea, agreed Klein.
He also took the opportunity to steer the conversation. "Why don't you read some of the grammar books in my room? To be truly dignified and to earn a handsome pay, that's something rather critical. Perhaps, in the times to come, the civil servant examinations will appear in Lone Kingdom. Preparing ahead of time would give him the advantage." Benson's eyes lit up when he heard that. "I've indeed forgotten about that. Here, let's toast to a beautiful future." He did not drink rye beer. Instead, he poured clear oyster soup into 3 cups and clinked his cup with his siblings. After drinking the clear soup, he looked at his sister who was wrestling with the pan-fried fish. He chuckled and said, "Aside from Benson's books, I think Melissa needs a new dress too." Melissa looked up and shook her head incessantly. "No, I think it's best to save it up."
Klein finished the sentence for her.
"Yeah." Melissa nodded in agreement. "In fact, if you do not seek the best fabrics and the newest designs, it would not be too expensive. We can save up the remaining money," said Klein in a manner which did not allow for disagreement. Benson added, "Melissa, are you planning on wearing the old dress again to Selena's 16th birthday bash?" Selena Wood was Melissa's classmate and good friend. She came from quite a good family background. Her elder brother was a practicing solicitor and her father was a senior employee of Backlund Bank's Tingen branch. However, the so-called bash was only a dinner invitation to friends where they chatted and played cards.
"All right."
Melissa lowered her head and mumbled a response. Then, she ruthlessly forked a piece of stewed beef. After a short silence, she suddenly recalled something and looked up abruptly. "Mrs. Shoud from next door got her maidservant to send a calling card over. She wishes to make a formal visit on Sunday, at 4 in the afternoon tomorrow. She wants to get to know her new neighbors."
"Mrs. Shoud."
Klein looked at his siblings, confounded. Benson rapped the side of the table with his fingers and appeared to be thinking. "Mrs. Shoud from 4 Daffodil Street? I met her husband before. He's a senior solicitor." "Senior solicitor. Perhaps he knows Selena's brother," said Melissa with some hints of delight. "We are at 2 Daffodil Street." Klein nodded slightly. "It's imperative we get to know our neighbors, but as you know, I still have to be at the company on Sunday. I only have time off on Monday. Please pass my apologies to Mrs. Shoud." With that said, he suddenly recalled the neighbors of his former life when he was young, as well as the neighbors in the apartment from Iron Cross Street. He was amused as he sighed lightly. To have formal visits. Shouldn't neighbors get to know each other through natural interaction?
Haha, Klein, that's because you aren't aware.
You have read a lot of newspapers recently, but you have not broached the magazines catered towards families and middle-aged women. They placed families with an annual income of £100 to £1,000 as middle class. They promoted it as the framework of the entire kingdom and praised how the middle class doesn't have the arrogance of the aristocrats and the wealthy, nor are they as crass as the low-income brackets. Benson lightly and happily explained, these magazines impart many simplified ceremonies which the aristocrats practice in their interactions. As such, it becomes a target of the middle class. Thus, this results in the differences between intimate calls, semi-formal calls and formal calls. As he spoke, he shook his head and chuckled. Typically, gentlemen, madams, and ladies who view themselves in this class will be very particular about details. They will visit their neighbors and friends from 2 to 6 in the afternoon. It's known as a morning call. One morning call? Klein and Melissa asked in surprise. Why was a visit from 2 to 6 in the afternoon a morning call? Benson put down his fork and knife, threw his hands up, and smiled. I do not know why either. All I did was read the magazines my female colleague brought. Yeah, perhaps it's because they wear their morning gowns to make the call. Morning gowns were a form of formal attire worn during mass or gatherings. Later, it was considered as formal attire for the day, different from the formal attire for evening functions.
All right.
Remember to buy some good coffee powder and tea leaves in the afternoon. Buy some muffins and lemon egg tarts from Mrs. Smyron. We must not ill-treat our neighbors. Klein chuckled as he dipped his remaining bread into the meat sauces, grabbed some potato and put it into his mouth. The next morning was a Sunday morning. Klein finished the last mouthful of inferior tea, put down the newspapers, and wore his half-top hat. Picking up his silver-inlaid black cane, he sauntered out the door and took a public carriage to Zutland Street. He greeted Roseanne, who was planning to sleep in the break room after finishing her night duty. After which, he went all the way down to the basement. After turning a corner, he met a Nighthawk member, sleepless Royale Radine. She looked like a cold lady. Her brows were long and slender, sitting atop large eyes. Her hair was a silky smooth black. Good morning, Madame Radine, Klein greeted with a smile. Royale used her deep blue eyes to glance at him and nodded indiscernibly in return. The two quickly passed by each other when Royale stopped and said with her eyes trained forward, "Ritualistic magic is a very dangerous thing."
Ah.
Klein was taken aback. By the time he turned around, all he saw was her departing back.
Thank you.
He frowned and shouted at Royale Ridine's back. After taking a left band, he quickly met old Neil inside the armory, as well as Brett, who should not have been there.
Let's go to my place.
I've already received the corresponding materials. Brett has agreed to watch the armory for me, said old Neil with a chuckle. Klein was immediately surprised. We aren't doing it here? Old Neil held a silver chest and tooted. There's no space here to practice ritualistic magic. Klein did not ask further. He followed old Neil up to the streets and took a public carriage to the Northborough suburbs. Old Neil's place was a bungalow. The garden in front of it was filled with roses, golden mint, and other materials. The moment he entered, there was a carpeted foyer. There were 2 high-back chairs and an umbrella rack. Through the foyer was an expansive living room. The walls were plastered with light-colored wallpaper. The floors were a dark brown color. In the middle of the room was a tiny carpet with floral imprints, and placed above it was a heavy round table. Surrounding the table were comfortable long benches, single-seaters, and a piano. My deceased wife loved music. Old Neil pointed at the piano and mentioned in passing, the sofa and coffee table are in the bedrooms. Let's do the ritualistic magic in the living room. All right, Klein replied cautiously. After old Neil put down the silver chest, he laughed and said, let me demonstrate to you ritualistic magic. Make sure to observe and remember the ritual. As he spoke, he took out a fake goatskin parchment from the chest. It was specially made and it had strange pictures drawn on it with black ink that exuded a serene fragrance. Klein kept watching and finally discovered that old Neil was seemingly, likely, possibly drawing an IOU. When old Neil filled in the corresponding field with the number 30 and the corresponding pound symbol, Klein could not help but ask out of puzzlement and confusion, Mr. Neil, what kind of ritualistic magic are you doing? Old Neil coughed and answered very seriously, I'll be using magic to settle that debt of £30 today.
You can do that?
Klein's eyes widened as his mouth gaped. Using magic to settle an IOU? Is he trying to curse his debtor to death or create counterfeit notes? I might not have a solution to the problem, but I can finish you instead? All sorts of thoughts appeared in Klein's mind as he looked at old Neil with an oddly. He seriously considered the possibility of calling the cops, no, of informing the Nighthawks. Old Neil shot a glance at him and said peeved, I can see ignorance, foolishness, and the weak and shameless disbelief in your eyes. Didn't Dunn tell you the maxim of the mystery priors? Do as you wish but do no harm. Although this maxim originated from the secret and evil Moses Ascetic Order organization, Beyonders who choose the path of Moses Ascetic Order have proven that it's right through their own experiences. As long as one strictly abides to it and shows the needed fear and reverence, the risk of losing control will be minimized. The contrary has similarly been established. Your suspicion towards me is an insult to mystery priors.
Sorry.
Klein did not hesitate to apologize. He had indeed forgotten that Dunn Smith had once mentioned the maxim. Old Neil was not truly angry.
In a blink of an eye, he chuckled. A pity.
Very few Beyonders choose to be seers. There is no corresponding maxim to help you. But I have Emperor Roselle's diaries. Yes, strictly abiding to the maxim has a hint of acting. Klein suddenly came to this thought as he nodded as if in deep thought. Old Neil did not continue. He removed the vases and other items from the round table and placed them in a corner. Immediately following that, he took out both a crimson red and black candle from the silver chest. He explained, if ordinary people attempt ritualistic magic, they have to follow the results from astromancy or read corresponding manuals. They have to choose suitable dates and times. For example, the day representing the goddess, the period when she rules over the moon. But for us Beyonders, especially Beyonders good in this domain, there's no need for that. Our acute spiritual perception and potent astral projections are key. Of course, if you are not confident about the ritualistic magic you are attempting, it's best to choose a suitable date and time. It can increase the probability of success.
All right.
This is based on a premise. Remember carefully to abide strictly by the rules. Old Neil placed 2 candles and turned to the side and looked at Klein, saying very solemnly, low-sequence Beyonders are not strong enough. Almost all the ritualistic magic they can perform are the seeking of external powers and help. Therefore, you can only consider orthodox divinities like the goddess or the Lord of Storms. Absolutely do not attempt to communicate with the unknown or unpredictable existences. Even if people believe in them or the promises recorded are filled with enticements. Believe me, don't take any chances. As long as you attempt once, you will go down a slippery slope into the abyss with no return. Any work or resistance will only slow it down with no way to change the trajectory. I'll remember,
Klein said in a deep voice.
However, he felt a little afraid. My luck enhancement ritual has apparently sought power from an unknown and unpredictable existence. Furthermore, I have gained powers capable of pulling people into the fog that even a senior Beyonder like the Hanged Man finds unbelievable.
Well,
at least I think he is a senior Beyonder. Thankfully, I haven't gone mad or have any signs of losing control. While worrying over this, he proactively changed the subject. So, Nighthawks should seek the help of the goddess? No one will stop you if you pray to the Lord of Storms. However, we are unable to tell from our ritualistic magic whether he replies with malicious intent or not. The outcome will be distorted in unpredictable ways. Old Neil successfully made Klein give up the idea in a joking manner. There was no so-called best, only necessary. After his exhortations, Old Neil picked up a crimson red candle and said, by using candles made of moonflowers and dark red sandalwood, it will represent the goddess's identity as Lady of Crimson in the ritualistic magic. He pointed to the black candles and said, candles made of night vanilla and slumber flowers represent the night. As he spoke, he placed the black candle on the top left end of the round table, while the red candle was placed on the top right end. Why do we symbolize the goddess with only 2 candles? She is also the mistress of calm and silence, empress of disaster and horror, and mistress of calm and silence.
Old Neil chuckled. That's right.
This is something I wished you asked. Before their fall, the Moses Ascetic Order had a very good relationship with the Church. Their beliefs and results on ritualistic magic have heavily influenced us. They believe that all objects are numeric. Every number has a spirituality, and in ritualistic magic, 0 represents the unknown or chaos. It symbolizes the state of the universe before it was born. 1 represents a beginning, the first creator. 2 represents the world and various divinities that were produced from his body. 3 represents contact between divinities and material objects to create all things. Here, using 2 candles represents the goddess while the 3rd candle is for you. Which 2 candles and which 2 symbols to have depend on the intended effects of ritualistic magic. 3 begets all things 1. All things stem from 3. Klein could not help but recall certain things from his previous life. Seeing Klein listen attentively, Old Neil took a 3rd candle and said, this is the candle representing me. It's a very ordinary candle, which only has a little bit of mint added. Take note that plants like roses, lemons, mint, moonflower, night vanilla, and Slumberflower are beloved and cherished by the goddess. Viewing it from another angle, the 3 candles represent the bodies, spiritualities, and godhood of every person. After finishing the description, old Neil placed the 3rd candle in the middle of the round table. He then took out a bottle of concocted full moon essence oil, a huge cauldron engraved with a dark sacred emblem, a silver knife with gorgeous patterns, a cup of water, and a saucer of coarse salt. To beyonders who are not good at ritualistic magic, there is a need for bells, crystal balls, silver cups, incense, or other supplementary items. However, mystery priors and seers have no need for that. These artifacts are already sufficient. Old Neil placed the fake goatskin parchment with the IOU just below the cauldron and used a special quill to hold down one corner. He turned to Klein and said, "Ritualistic magic needs a clean spiritual environment where you will not be disturbed. And that requires us to create it. The steps are to first enter cogitation. Focus your mind and with the supplementary items, draw out our strength, and construct it around us. For example, Ray Bieber's house had used holy night powder, while I'll be using a ritual silver dagger. Throughout the entire process, we have to go according to the outcome we desire to confirm the symbolism and corresponding incantation. Incantations are best done in Hermes because ancient Hermes stemmed from nature. It's akin to ancient Dragonish and ancient Elvish. The effects are very direct, lacking the necessary concealment and protection. It easily causes the caster to fall into danger. This is also why it has been modified. However, it's more effective. Alright, I have to focus on the ritualistic magic. I won't explain things to you any further. Pay attention by watching and listening. Remember any problems and ask me when everything is done.
Alright.
Klein took 2 steps back and trained his eyes on old Neil. Old Neil's eyes rapidly darkened as invisible wind around him spun. He was silent for a moment, going from left to right, then up to down, using his psyche to cause friction and consecutively light up the 3 candles. Following that, he picked up the silver knife and stabbed it into the coarse salt. Then, he chanted in Hermes. "I sanctify you, blade of pure silver. I cleanse and purify you, allowing you to serve me in this ritual. In the name of the Evernight goddess, the Lady of Crimson, you have been sanctified." After a short but powerful syllable, old Neil drew a silver knife and inserted it into a cup of clear water. Then, he raised it and pointed to the space beyond the round table. He aimed the blade tip in the periphery and took a step forward, circling the round table. Every step he took made Klein feel an invisible energy spew out of the silver knife. It was filled with spirituality as it connected with the air, forming a completely sealed wall. After walking 1 round, the altar was completely isolated from its surroundings. Old Neil stood in front of the round table and put the silver knife down. He picked up the bottle of full moon essence oil and dripped 3 drops on the black, dark red, and ordinary candles.
Sizzle.
A thin mist emanated as everything seemed to become veiled in mystery. Old Neil put down the glass bottle and looked at the fake goatskin parchment silently for 2 minutes. Then, he picked up the quill and drew a mark he controlled, a square that framed all the content, indicating that he was in control of the debt. Following that, he drew another cross, indicating that it was cancelled. Upon reaching this step, he picked up the parchment with one hand and tapped his glabella with the other to activate his spirit vision. Another invisible and exuberant energy bloomed as old Neil whispered a chant. "I pray for the power of the dark night. I pray for the power of the crimson. I pray for the goddess's loving grace. Please provide me with the funds to pay this IOU. Night vanilla, an herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation. Moonflower, an herb that belongs to the red moon, please bestow your powers to my incantation." Klein was completely flabbergasted listening from the side. All sorts of thoughts arose in him. Such an incantation can work? Although it was recited from written Hermes. Isn't this way too simple and down to earth? Wouldn't the goddess be angry and multiply the debt several-fold? At that moment, the candlelight lit up suddenly. After old Neil finished his incantation, he closed his eyes for 2 minutes. He picked up the full moon essence oil and dripped 1 drop onto each of the 3 candles. Immediately following that, he grabbed the parchment and pulled it close to the candle representing me. When it ignited, he immediately threw it into the cauldron. Old Neil closed his eyes again as he seemed to sense the burning of the IOU. He opened his eyes after a moment and looked toward the black sacred emblem on the cauldron. The parchment was already completely incinerated. Praise the lady. Old Neil tapped his chest in 4 spots, forming the shape of the crimson moon. Then, he extinguished the candles in the opposite order as he lit them. After finishing everything, he used the silver knife to rip apart the invisible wall around him. A huge wind stirred immediately as old Neil heaved a sigh of relief.
It's done. That's it.
Klein asked in a daze. Has the IOU been settled?
How? I don't know either.
Anyways, it will be settled in a reasonable manner, said old Neil with a smile as he threw up his hands.
This?
Klein was unsure what expression or words to use as a response. Isn't this a little unreliable? Stop thinking about the bloody IOU. Let's discuss the ritualistic magic. Old Neil put away the candles, cauldron, silver knife, and other items with a relaxed expression. Klein really wanted to shrug his shoulders like the Americans in his previous life, but ultimately could not bring himself to do something that ungentlemanly. He turned his focus toward the ritualistic magic and threw out detailed questions that puzzled him, receiving answers from them. For example, the incantations had a particular format. As long as they were satisfied and the key meaning was expressed in Hermes, the rest could be left to one's creativity. Of course, blasphemy or disrespectful descriptions were absolutely forbidden. The mysticism class lasted until noon before old Neil coughed twice. We have to return to Zutland Street. With that said, he grumbled in an indistinct manner. To get these bloody materials, I missed my beloved breakfast. Klein looked around both amused and puzzled. Mr. Neil, do you have a chef? Or a maidservant in charge of cooking? A weekly salary of £12 could hire several servants. According to the newspapers, with board and lodging provided, hiring an ordinary chef cost anywhere between 12 to 15 soldi a week. It did not even need £1. A maidservant to do miscellaneous chores was even cheaper. Their weekly salaries ranged between 3 soldi 6 pence to 6 soldi. Of course, one could not bear any hope of them having any culinary skills.
That's not right.
With Mr. Neil's debt of £30, it's only normal he doesn't hire any chefs or servants. It seems I've asked another question I should not have asked. While Klein regretted his question, old Neil shook his head without minding it. I often attempt ritualistic magic, research extraordinary items, and read corresponding documents at home, so I don't nor is it possible that I hire ordinary people as chefs, butlers or maidservants. I only hire someone to clean up the place regularly. And if they are not ordinary people, do you think they will be willing to do such jobs? I seem to have asked a silly question. It's possibly because I will not do anything that involves mysticism at home, explained Klein in a self-deprecating manner. Old Neil had long stood up, wore his round felt hat, and while walking out the door, rambled on. I seem to smell pan-fried foie gras. Once the IOU is completely settled, I'll definitely have one set. For lunch, I'll definitely eat roasted pork glazed with apple juices.
No, that's not enough.
I must have a sausage infused with mashed potatoes. You are making me hungry. Klein swallowed his saliva as he caught up to old Neil and headed for the nearby public carriage stop. After returning to Zutland Street, old Neil suddenly grunted after stepping down the carriage. What do I see? Goddess, what am I seeing? He was suddenly as nimble as a 17 or 18-year-old lad. He quickly came to the roadside and picked up an item. Klein leaned close out of curiosity and looked carefully. He realized it was a wallet with fine workmanship. With his lack of experience, he could barely tell if the dark brown wallet was made of buffalo skin or sheepskin, but he noticed a small light blue logo embroidered on the side of the wallet, a white dove spreading its wings as if ready to take off. That was Klein's first impression. The second thing he noticed was the stack of paper notes in the bulging wallet. There were more than 20 gray notes imprinted with black ink, gold pounds. Old Neil opened up the wallet and pulled out the notes. When he looked at it carefully, he immediately chuckled.
10-pound notes.
The Honorable Founder and Protector, William I. Wow, Goddess, there's a total of 30 notes. There's also a few 5-pound notes, 1 pound and 5 soldi notes. More than 300 pounds? That's a huge amount of money in every meaning of the word. I might not even earn that much in 10 years. Klein's breathing turned heavy involuntarily. As the amount of gold pounds was immense, picking up such a wallet was equivalent to picking up a briefcase of banknotes in his previous life. I wonder which gentleman dropped it. He can't be someone ordinary, analyzed Klein calmly. Such a wallet was clearly not a woman's. There's no need to care who he is, said old Neil with a chuckle. It's not like we attempted to divine and take money that doesn't belong to us. We should wait here for a moment. I believe the gentleman will soon be back searching for it. It's not something that can be given up no matter who it is. Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He had a brand new understanding of old Neil's morals. He was rather worried that he would have used the goddess's bestowment as an excuse and paid off his debt. He was still wondering how to prevent it and persuade him otherwise. Is this do as you wish but do no harm? Klein suddenly learned something new. The duo did not wait more than a minute by the streets when a luxurious four-wheeled carriage zoomed over. Its side had a light blue logo with a dove spreading its wings. The carriage stopped, and a middle-aged man dressed in a black formal suit with a bow tie of the same color alighted. He looked at the wallet, took off his hat, and said politely, "Sirs, that should be my master's wallet. Your logo is proof of everything, but I need to make additional verifications. This is to be responsible for all parties." "Might I ask how much money is there in the wallet?" replied old Neil politely. The middle-aged man was taken aback as he said in a self-deprecating manner almost immediately, "As a butler, I do not know how much money master had in his wallet."
Sorry.
"Please permit me to ask." "As you wish." Old Neil gestured for him to do as he pleased. The middle-aged man walked to the carriage's side and through the window, conversed with the person within. He approached Klein and old Neil again and smiled. "More than £300, but less than £350. My master does not remember the exact number."
Does not remember.
"That's really some filthy rich guy. If I had that much money on me, I would definitely be counting it again and again." Klein was filled with envy. Old Neil nodded and handed the wallet back. "With the goddess as proof, this belongs to you." The middle-aged man took the wallet over and did an estimate before pulling out 3 10-pound notes. "My master is Sir Deweyville. He wishes to commend your morals. This is what an honest person should receive. Please do not reject it."
Sir Deweyville?
"The one who established the Deweyville Trust? The Sir Deweyville who provided cheap rental apartments to the working class?" Klein immediately remembered the name. He was a knight that his brother respected but did not believe was grounded in reality.
Thank you, Sir Deweyville.
He is a kind and generous gentleman. Old Neil did not stand on ceremony as he received the 3 notes. After watching Sir Deweyville's carriage depart, he turned to look at Klein when he saw that there was no one around. He flicked the notes and chuckled.
£30.
"The IOU is settled. I said it will be settled in a reasonable manner. This is the power of magic. NOVLB //JNN. Holy F *** king power of magic. That actually works?" Klein was once again flabbergasted. A few minutes later he entered the building's stairwell and while heading to the security company, he asked puzzledly, "Mr. Neil, why didn't you ask for more money?"
Do not be greedy.
One must take care not to be greedy when doing ritualistic magic. Temperance is a critical trait needed by every mystery prior if they wish to live long, explained old Neil happily. In a huge ballroom, candles were burning on a few chandeliers, emitting a fragrance that soothed the minds of people. By the sheer number of candles, they produced a light in no way inferior to that of gas lamps. There were long tables with pan-fried foie gras, grilled steak, roasted chicken, fried tonguefish, desi oysters, mutton stew, cream soup, and other delicacies. In addition, there were bottles of mist champagne, Ormer grape wine, and Southville red wine. They were all glistening with a tempting glow under the light. Servants in red vests carried trays with crystal cups and shuttled between the gentlemen and ladies dressed both elegantly or gorgeously. Audrey Hall was wearing a collared high-waisted, pale white dress with engagiantes. Her corset was tightly fitted, while her voluminous layers were puffed up perfectly with a cage crinoline. Her long blonde hair was coiled up in an elegant bun and the earrings, necklace, and rings she wore sparkled brightly. At her feet were a pair of white dancing shoes that were stitched with roses and diamonds. "How many petticoats am I even wearing? 5? 6? Wearing white silk gloves, Audrey caressed her crinoline gently with her right hand. Her left hand was holding a glass of clear champagne. Audrey was nothing like her usual self, usually placing herself center stage of banquets and making her the focus of attention. Instead, she avoided the bustle and quietly stood in the shadows of hanging curtains by the French windows. She took a sip of champagne as she watched the crowd as though she did not belong. Count Wolf's youngest son is chatting with Viscount Conrad's daughter. He likes to move his forearm to reinforce what he says.
The bigger the movement of his forearm, the more unbelievable his words.
That is something gleaned from experience. He can't stop trying to elevate himself by putting other people down. However, he can't help but feel guilty. It can be seen by the way he talks and his body language. Duchess Della has repeatedly covered her mouth while laughing with her left hand today.
Ah, I see.
She is showing off her pure ocean blue sapphire. Her husband, Duke Negan, is discussing the current situation with a few conservative nobles. Since the banquet began, he has searched for Duchess Della once. They almost never make eye contact. Maybe they aren't as in love as they pretend to be. Baron Larry has made Madame Parnes laugh 7 times. That's very normal, nothing strange about it, but why does she look at her husband with guilty eyes? Oh, they have gone their separate ways. That's not right, the directions they are headed leads to the garden. In the extravagant banquet, Audrey saw many details she never noticed in the past. There was an instant where she nearly believed that she was watching an opera. Everyone is a good opera actor. She sighed silently as her eyes remained limpid. At that moment, she suddenly sensed something and turned her head. She cast her gaze onto a dark corner in the large balcony outside. In the shadows was a huge golden retriever sitting there silently. She was looking inside at Audrey, while half her body was hidden in the darkness. Susie. The corners of Audrey's mouth twitched as her expression instantly changed. She could no longer maintain her state as a spectator. An ancient three-masted sailboat was navigating through a tumultuous storm in the sea. It was not fast and its displacement was lacking. With the weather and the sea looking like a cataclysmic scene, the sailboat was like a withered leaf separated from its tree. However, regardless of how the typhoons rampaged or how terrifying the waves were, it continued sailing peacefully without any signs of tilting. Alger Wilson stood on the empty deck as he looked at the massive waves that resembled mountains. His thoughts were a mystery. "It's going to be Monday again," he muttered silently to himself. It was the day belonging to Mother Earth, the beginning of a series of waxing and waning. However, it meant something different to Alger. It belonged to a mysterious existence forever enveloped in grayish-white fog. "At least I haven't been reduced to a madman." He stopped looking around as he gave a self-deprecating chuckle. At this moment, one of the only few sailors he had leaned over and asked reverently, "Your Grace, where are we setting course for this time?" Alger surveyed his surroundings and said in calm voice, "Pursue the listener from the Aurora Order." The storm subsided as mist emanated. On a strange sailboat with cannons on board, an 8 or 9-year-old boy with soft yellow hair was looking at pirates around him in fear. They were disorderly, some enjoyed barrels of beer, some swung around with ropes, others mocked each other, and some even fought with their fists. He turned to look at a black-robed man standing in the shadows. He suppressed his voice and asked, "Father, where are we going?" 5 days ago was his first time seeing his father, a father who proclaimed to be an adventurer. If not for the oil painting his late mother left him that confirmed his father's identity and the fact that the orphanage had opened its doors to him, he was absolutely unwilling to leave his hometown and follow his only kin who was also nearly a stranger. The man in the shadows lowered his head and looked at his son. With an amiable expression he answered, "Jack, I'm bringing you to a holy place, a holy residence where the Creator once lived." "Is that the kingdom of God? We mortals can only enter by winning His grace." Jack had been well educated by his mother and knew this much. He was both surprised and fearful about the matter. Standing in the shadows, the man had an unforgettable jawline as though he was a sculpture chiseled by the best artisan. He placed his hand to his ear and made a listening pose. He replied in a tone that sounded like sleep-talking, "Jack, mortals are a wrong concept. The Creator created this world and He is everywhere. He exists in every living being. Therefore, all beings have godhood. Once the godhood attains a particular level, they can become an angel. The 7 fake gods at present are only powerful angels. Look, I can now hear the teachings of the Creator. Ah, how extraordinary is this revelation! Life is only a tour of the spirit. When the spirit is sufficiently potent and resilient, we can find our godhood and fuse with even more godhoods." Jack could not understand the complicated description. He shook his head and asked another question he previously did not have the chance to. "Father, I heard from Mother that after the Creator created this world, He split into all beings and does not exist in actuality. Then, why does His holy residence exist?" As a 7 to 8-year-old child, he was logical. The man with the chiseled face was taken aback. He turned his head away as though he was listening to more murmurings. Suddenly, he slumped down, knees on the deck. His exposed skin protruded black shards. He clenched his head with both hands as his expression warped and he shouted in extreme pain, "They are lying." After lunch, having had old Neil promise him that he would bring him to the underground market the next time he went, Klein slowly returned to the Blackthorn Security Company. He chose the 2 options of reading the documents in the staff office and practicing his abilities, or take the opportunity to go out and act as a seer in the divination club before Captain Dunn stopped him. However, before he could make the decision, he saw Dunn Smith walk in. He was dressed in the usual black windbreaker and half-top hat. "Captain, any updates?" Klein thought of the whereabouts of the Antigonus family's notebook as he asked with concern. Without showing any signs of fatigue in his gray eyes, Dunn said, "The facts have corroborated that the Antigonus family's notebook is in Ray Bieber's hands. However, he has vanished completely. NOV-LB //JNN. I have already informed the various Nighthawk teams of this matter through a telegram. They were requested to pay attention to the various piers and steam locomotive stations. The first batch of printed portraits was mailed out yesterday afternoon and will be printed in various major newspapers. How nice it would be if there were phones, fax machines, surveillance cameras, and big data. What a pity. I know how to use all of them and even understand a little of the logic behind it." Klein exhaled silently. "But regardless, we can consider ourselves as having found the notebook. And this is all thanks to you. Of course, it still needs another round of confirmations. I have already sent a telegram to the Backland Diocese, requesting them to escort sealed artifact 2-049 here. It was once a dangerous item of the Antigonus family. It can help us know if Ray Bieber is a descendant of the Antigonus family. A grade 2 sealed artifact. Dangerous. They can be used with care and moderation. Klein had originally wanted to ask about the sealed artifact, its special abilities, and the danger it posed out of curiosity, but he instantly recalled that he lacked the necessary clearance. He had no choice but to give up.
May Goddess bless us.
Klein tapped 4 spots on his chest, forming the sign of the full moon. Dunn pushed open the door to his office and said with a slight nod, "The goddess has always been protecting us. Klein, if you had not chosen Seer, you would be a formal member after this matter is verified. You could have chosen Sleepless, but pity.
To be frank, I'm still puzzled over your choice.
Although Corpse Collector is quite off-putting, you have seen Daily as well. You should know that spirit mediums vary in strength. As for Mystery Priors, they're a good choice too. At the very least, you have Old Neil as a role model, so he will make sure the risk of losing control is minimized." With regards to this question, Klein had prepared an answer from the beginning. He just never had a chance to use it since Dunn did not ask. He was only able to answer in passing. He organized his words and said, "My considerations stem from the fact that Seers and Mystery Priors are considered Beyonders with a support role. They do not need to always face enemies, for that's too dangerous. And both you and Old Neil said that in the domain of mystery and Beyonders, curiosity and experimentation usually brings about terrifying outcomes. Describing Mystery Priors as prying mysteries made me worried, so. As you know, I was only an ordinary graduate not long ago. A lack of guts is the only reason I made such a choice. I have to say that this is a very reasonable answer that goes beyond my expectations." Dunn massaged his temples and chuckled. He turned halfway as his gray eyes sized up Klein. "Continue going out for now. Do not limit yourself to the paths leading from Welch's Place to Iron Cross Street. Perhaps you might sense the notebook and help us confirm Ray Bieber's location."
All right.
Klein realized that he no longer need to be in a dilemma. He bade Dunn farewell and turned around, his heart beginning to count.
3-2. Hold on, shouted Dunn.
Klein turned his head and smiled. "Captain, is there anything else?" Dunn coughed slightly and said, "Well, support Beyonders have to fight their enemies from time to time. Although Seers sound like they can avoid such battles, they are not to be ignored. You have to maintain your shooting skills and work on increasing your strength. This is what I'm working hard towards."
Klein pointed outside. "I'll be leaving." "All right. Wait a moment."
Dunn shouted for him once more. As he pondered, he said, "Perhaps I have to consider hiring a combat trainer for you. Of course, this matter is under the premise that you become a formal member." Klein responded tersely before asking carefully, "Captain, is there anything else?"
"No."
Seeing Klein's unbelieving eyes, Dunn shook his head and smiled. He emphasized again, "Really nothing?" Only then did Klein walk past the partition divider. He bade farewell to Roseanne and Mrs. Oriana and headed to the shooting club for practice. With all of this done, he went to the divination club and saw the beautiful Angelica standing there reading newspapers leisurely.
"Home."
Klein silently read. With the cane in hand, he walked over and greeted with a smile. "Good afternoon, Madam Angelica." "Good afternoon, Mr. Moretti." In no rush, Angelica put down her magazine. She stood up and said, "Not long after you left yesterday, Mr. Glassy came. He just recovered from a major illness." Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he smiled. "That sure is something worth celebrating." Upon hearing this, Angelica, who was secretly observing him, lowered her voice and asked out of curiosity, "Mr. Glassy said that you are a very, very, very magical doctor."
"Are you?" "What?"
Klein looked at the lady in front of him, suspecting if he was hearing things. "What made him think I'm a doctor?"
"Even I do not know."
Upon seeing Klein's odd expression, Angelica immediately felt her beliefs waver. "Is that so? Mr. Glassy mentioned that you were able to tell of an ailment in his lungs simply from observation." Her voice softened until she finally shut up.
"Observation? A dark glabella?"
Klein was instantly enlightened as he shook his head with a chortle. "I believe Mr. Glassy was mistaken. He was planning on being perfunctory, but after recalling that no one sought his divination services the entire afternoon yesterday, his mind whirled. It affected his goal of acting as a seer, so he explained, it's actually a form of divination."
"Divination?"
"But Mr. Glassy only mentioned that you observed his face. That's also considered divination?" asked Angelica in shock and doubt.
Klein smiled, composed.
As a member of the divination club, You should know about palm reading, right? Palm reading was not patented by the Foodaholic Empire. Even on Earth, India and old Europe had developed similar principles, much less in a world with beyonder powers. I know about it, but it seems you did not read his palm? Were you observing him in secret? Asked Angelica curiously. I was using face reading. Klein cooked up a lie. Its principles aren't very different from palm reading at a fundamental level. Really? Angelica's eyes were filled with disbelief. In order to develop his career as a seer, Klein chuckled. He pretended to be in thought as he tapped his glabella twice. He focused his eyes and Angelica's aura presented itself. Her head was purple, her limbs were red, her throat was blue. There was no problems with her health except for some colors being duller. However, that was a manifestation of ordinary fatigue. Klein then looked at her emotions. She saw orange mixed in with some red and blue. It also meant warmth coupled with some excitement and thought. NOVLB //JNN. Thankfully, after realizing that there was nothing abnormal about her, Klein planned on deactivating his spirit vision. But it was at that moment when he suddenly saw rich darkness hidden in the depths of her emotional colors. Furthermore, she is lacking a little of white, an eagerness to improve. Klein nodded while in thought. Mr. Moretti, were you reading my face? Seeing the young gentleman in black in front of her turn silent abruptly while seriously sizing her up, Angelica keenly noticed something. She asked in a half-curious and half-worried manner. Klein did not immediately reply. Instead, he tapped his glabella lightly as he wore a look of scrutiny. Just as Angelica was feeling unease, he said warmly, Madam Angelica, there are some sorrows and pains which you should not seal in your heart. Angelica's eyes widened as her mouth turned agape. However, she did not say a word. She looked at Klein in his half-top hat with an apparent scholarly bearing. He heard him use a deep, comforting and warm voice to say, you need to either go mountain climbing, a game of tennis, or perform a tragic play to exhaust your body due to exercising. Let your tears flow down uninhibited, then cry and scream. Express all those emotions. That will be very helpful to your health. The moment those words entered her ears, Angelica felt like she had transformed into a statue. She stood there motionless. She tried hard to blink as she lowered her head in a fluster, saying deeply, thank you for your suggestion. It seems like there are many members here today. Klein did not continue. As though he had not done any divinations prior, he turned to his side and looked to the meeting room at the end of the corridor. Sunday afternoon. At least 50 members. Angelica's voice sounded a little hoarse. She only mentioned the key terms. She paused as her vocal pace gradually returned to normal. Do you want tea or coffee? Sai black tea. Klein nodded slightly. He politely took off his hat and slowly walked to the meeting room. Only when he vanished behind the door did Angelica exhale slowly. The Divination Club's meeting room was very large. It was nearly twice the size of Klein's high school classroom. In the past, only 5 or 6 members would be present, making it look extremely empty. Now, there were dozens of fortune tellers sitting in different spots. They filled up most of the room. Sunlight shone into the room through the few oriel windows. The members were either discussing softly among themselves or asking Hannes Vincent questions. Otherwise, they were practicing and attempting divination or drinking coffee and reading newspapers by themselves. Such a scene made Klein feel like he was back to his schooling days on Earth. The difference was that it was noisier and more rowdy back then, without the tranquility of the meeting room. He looked around, but he didn't see familiar faces like Glassy or Edward Steve. So, he casually picked up a divination textbook, found a corner, and started flipping through it leisurely. Very soon, Angelica came in with a cup of tea and left it on the table before Klein. As she was leaving quietly, she suddenly saw Mr. Moretti take out an exquisite-looking silver chain from his left sleeve. There was a chunk of pure topaz hanging on the silver chain. What is he doing? Angelica slowed down subconsciously and focused her gaze at Klein. Klein held the silver chain with his left hand and allowed the topaz to hang above the Sai black tea, just short of touching the surface of the liquid. With a serene expression, he half closed his eyes and the atmosphere around him suddenly turned quiet. The topaz started moving slightly, along with the special-looking silver chain, in a clockwise direction. Upon seeing this, Angelica found Mr. Moretti extremely mysterious. The black tea you provide is great, Klein said softly after he opened his eyes with a smile. His actions were intentionally done for Angelica to see. If he wanted people to select him for his divination services, Angelica's recommendation was a very crucial factor. Since he wanted to act as a seer, Klein no longer had any reservations. He completely personified the identity. Yes, Mr. Vanas is very picky about the quality of tea, Angelica said, stunned. Klein put away his spirit pendulum by winding it properly. Then, he raised the white porcelain cup with floral design. With a smile, he gestured politely at her with his cup. Angelica returned to the reception hall, but she no longer had the mood to read magazines. She sat there, gazing into the distance. It was a wonder what she was thinking about. This continued until there were knocks on the door. She jolted awake and hurriedly looked at the entrance, only to see a lady dressed in a light blue dress. The lady took off her veiled hat with a powder blue ribbon.
She looked calm and melancholic. "Good afternoon, esteemed lady.
Would you like to join the divination club, or are you looking for a divination?" Angelica asked like clockwork. "I want a divination." The lady had a beautiful pair of eyes hidden with sorrow, and she bit her lower lip as she spoke. Angelica guided her to the sofa and explained to her how the divination club worked in detail. She picked up an album and handed it over.
"You can pick anyone."
In her low spirits, the lady flipped through the album seriously. As there were too many club members there that day, there were too many choices. It left her quite upset.
"Can you recommend one?"
"From these few pages." She pointed at the middle section of the album, omitting the fortune tellers priced above 2 soldi and those below 4 pence. Angelica took the album and looked at it for a few minutes. She deliberated her words before saying, "I suggest this gentleman." The lady who looked uneasy took a glance and realized that it was a fortune teller named Klein Moretti. "Mr. Moretti just joined the club. Is his divination reliable?" she asked worriedly. Angelica nodded with great affirmation. "Another member of the club and I are certain that Mr. Moretti is an outstanding fortune teller. If it wasn't for his just joining the club, he wouldn't take such low fees."
"I understand." The depressed girl nodded.
"I'll pick Mr. Moretti for a divination then." "All right, please hold on for a second." Angelica took the album and walked towards the meeting room. She came next to Klein and said with a suppressed voice, "Mr. Moretti, someone wants you to divine for them. Which room would you like to use?" That was effective. "My first business is here." Klein put down his teacup and nodded calmly as he said, "Topaz room."
"All right."
Angelica walked slowly ahead of him and led him to Topaz room before opening its wooden door. Klein sat behind the table that had various divination tools on it. He waited less than a minute before he saw a woman in a light blue dress walk in. She looked down and melancholic. Seizing the opportunity when she was closing the door, he tapped his glabella twice. "The yellow color in her stomach seems a little dull. The dark color of her emotions is very heavy, mainly worry and anxiety." Klein looked her over carefully and leaned backwards. He then lifted his hand to cut off his spiritual vision. "Good day, Mr. Moretti." The woman in the light blue dress sat down. "Good afternoon, how may I address you?" Klein asked politely, not carrying much hope of getting an answer. As a keyboard warrior, he knew that many people were not willing to use their real names during divination.
"You can call me Anna."
The girl put her veiled cap aside. She looked at Klein with mixed anticipation and doubt, and said, "I would like to divine about my fiancé's situation. He traveled to the southern continent in March for a business deal. He sent me and his family a telegram last month on the 3rd, saying that he was going to set sail and return. But he did not return after 20 days. At first, I believed that his delay was due to the Berserk Ocean's weather, but as of today, it has been more than a month. The ship he took, the Alfalfa, still hasn't arrived at Enmat Harbor. The ocean that separated the northern and southern continent was called the Berserk Ocean. It was well known for natural calamities and its countless dangerous currents. If it was not for Emperor Roselle, who sent men to discover a few safer sailing routes, countries in the northern continent would still have yet to enter the age of colonization, let alone lay an underwater cable to complete a transoceanic telegraph. Klein looked at his very first client of his career as a seer and asked carefully, "Which divination method do you wish to use?" Anna, with her beautiful eyes, hesitated for more than 10 seconds. "You can choose any type that you believe will be accurate."
"You are the fortune teller, while I'm not."
"Of course, apart from cards, including tarot, I have also attempted studying them at home. I always felt they were more like toys or a game." Klein thought for a moment, his wrists leaning on the edge of the table. He steepled his hands before his face, his gaze peaceful. He said softly, "Then we shall use the astrolabe." He pointed to a fountain pen and stack of white paper on the table and said, "Write down the name of your fiancé as well as his facial features, address, and date of birth. It would be even better if you can remember the specific time he was born." From her clothes, makeup, and demeanor, Klein did not believe that she was illiterate. Anna did not reply. She extended her hand and took a piece of paper. She lifted the pen and dipped it in some ink. She started writing, pausing occasionally to think. 2 minutes later, she pushed the paper toward Klein. Klein received it and turned it around. The information on the paper read, Joyce Meyer, September 15, 1323, 2 p.m. Tingen City, East Borough, 8 Stevens Street. Short blonde hair, aquiline nose. With just a short glance, Klein quickly calculated the person's spiritual number. 1 plus 5 is equal to 6. In the study of spirit numerology and mysticism, adding the numbers of the day the person was born was called their birthday path number, affecting the person's life before 27. Birth month path number, calculated by adding the numbers in their birth month, affected their life from 27 to 54 years old, while the birth year path number, calculating the numbers in their birth year, affected their life from 54 years old onward. It was July 1349, so Joyce was not yet 27, thus, Klein immediately calculated the birthday path number. The number 6 represented a balanced and harmonious life, with a heart for giving and a decent marriage or engagement. Following this, he quickly calculated Joyce's year path number. The so-called year path number was calculated by replacing the birth year with the current year. The digits were then added with his birthday path number and birth month path number to get a general understanding of the person's luck for the year. 1 plus 3 plus 4 plus 9 is equal to 17, 1 plus 7 is equal to 8, 8 plus 9, birth month path number, plus 6, birthday path number, equals 23, 2 plus 3 is equal to 5, his year path number is 5, signifying that he would meet with change and accident. He would be required to take certain risks. Klein made a silent judgment after consolidating the facts. He confirmed that the information Anna gave was correct. He retracted his gaze from the paper and turned it toward Anna. Mr. Meyer set off on his journey on the 3rd of June? If he did not lie, that is indeed the case. Anna bit her lips.
All right.
Klein took the fountain pen and made a note of that. He looked at Anna with his dark brown eyes and said gently, I will begin creating the astrolabe now. I will need some time and absolute silence. Do you mind waiting outside? Angelica will provide you with a cup of tea or coffee.
All right.
Anna knew that some fortune tellers had their eccentricities, so she stood up unsurprised. She took her hat with the light blue ribbon and left the topaz room. Klein locked the door and returned to the table. He followed the information and set up the astrolabe, including elements such as his horoscope and locations of the corresponding planets and stars. Throughout the entire process, he did not open the astromancy manual. He completed the setup based on his memory. Over the past few days of his mysticism studies, Klein realized that he could easily grasp and understand anything about divination, quickly turning it into instinct. Perhaps that is the ability of a seer. He completed the astrolabe and felt satisfied. He felt as though his body, heart and soul had relaxed considerably. As he looked at the outcome, he followed the path of the horoscopes and planets, as well as other supporting details to roughly deduce that Joyce Meyer had met with an accident but would ultimately survive it. At this point, the divination was technically complete. But Klein wanted to pay much attention to his first business transaction. He hoped to build a reputation to aid in acquiring future jobs. He picked up the pen and wrote a sentence in Hermes, Joyce Meyer's current situation. He read the sentence silently and memorized the information on the piece of paper, repeating it again and again. After 7 times, Klein grabbed the piece of paper and leaned back into his chair. He imagined the sphere of light, and his eyes became darker, allowing him to quickly enter a state of cogitation. The surroundings took on an ethereal quality. A formless, boundless fog stretched above him. Klein recalled the contents of the piece of paper, then relaxed. He fell into a deep sleep in this state. He was using a dream divination technique. Repeating the question, remembering the details, and then allowing his astral projection to roam the spirit world in a dream would allow him to gain revelations. Ordinary people also had this sort of experience sometimes, but it was hard for them to recall, as the signs in their dreams were more complicated and garbled. A seer would not have such a problem, for they could see the images directly. The surroundings began to turn hazy as Klein turned half asleep. n/o/vel/b//in.c//om. In the contorted fantasy, he saw a blond young man with an aquiline nose. He was swimming frantically in a sea of blood, nearly engulfed by the waves. But in the end, he managed to escape to shore. The image shattered and changed. Klein saw a blue house with a toy windmill at the door. That blond young man was entering the house slowly, seemingly in joy. At this moment, the image changed once again. Klein realized that he was inside a magnificent palace. The walls were destroyed and damaged beyond repair. Moss and weeds grew in multiple areas. Through the holes in the walls, he could see a mountain peak and clouds clinging close to it outside. Atop the palace was a huge throne carved out of stone. It was adorned with dull gemstones and gold. It looked as though it was not prepared for a human. This giant throne was empty and mottled, as if it had been washed over by the ages. Klein looked around in confusion. He did not understand why he would be dreaming of such a scene. His turbid mind turned sharp as he subconsciously walked out of the palace in an attempt to ascertain where he was. Suddenly, he felt a gaze fall upon him. It was a gaze that came from behind. Klein suddenly turned around and stared towards the giant stone throne, only to see a scene of countless transparent maggots slowly twitching and growing. Klein gasped. He opened his eyes and woke up from his dream. Crystal balls, tarot cards, and the prepared astrolabe entered his vision. Reality quickly replaced fantasy. The initial dream was the result of the divination, but what was the later dream about? It seemed to be targeted at me. Klein put the piece of paper down. He rubbed his temples and contemplated. He could confirm that it wasn't his fear projecting itself in the form of a dream, for he was doing the divination himself. A palace not meant for humans on the peak of a mountain. The silent stare. The contorted and weird scene of the maggots. Klein silently guessed as he recalled. Has the luck enhancement ritual communicated with that existence? Or is it a result of the Antigonus family's notebook? Right, that notebook mentioned the nation of the Evernight in the Hornacis mountain range. The palace in the dream was on a mountain peak. He made a simple deduction and was relieved that he had picked seer. According to Old Neil, mystery priors could also divine through dreams, but they weren't as effective as a seer. Sigh, it sure isn't letting me go. All I can hope for is the early capture of Ray Bieber. Klein collected himself and picked up the piece of paper with the diagram of the astrolabe. He slowly walked towards the door. He opened the door and headed to the reception area. He saw Anna looking out the window, completely ignoring her cup of black tea. Ah, Mr. Moretti, is there a result? She saw Klein in her peripheral vision and stood up in a hurry. Klein did not answer her immediately. Instead, he asked according to the revelation he received from the dream, "Does your house or Mr. Meyer's house have a toy windmill?" Anna's eyes widened, shocked into silence. After a while she muttered, "That was a present he gave me. It is by the door at my house." "How did you know that?" "See, can this be divined?" Klein smiled and spoke with a gentle tone. "Congratulations, Miss Anna. Mr. Joyce Meyer is currently a guest at your place. If you rush back, you should still be able to meet him. He just experienced a calamity, an unimaginably painful journey. What he needs now are not questions, but consolation and a warm hug." "Really?" Anna asked in disbelief. The fortune-teller she knew would never speak with such certainty or give such firm conclusions. "You will know if you go back immediately," Klein replied with a gentle tone and smile. "Oh, Lord of Steam, is that true? Has my poor Joyce returned?" "Are you certain?" "No, I cannot believe it." Anna froze for a moment and said a few delirious words. She took out a one-solely note from her purse and did not wait for Klein to give her the change. She broke into a small jog as she left the divination club, taking a carriage back home. "Does this include my tip?" Klein looked at the note and shook his head with a laugh. A two-wheeled carriage steered quickly across the streets and entered East Borough. Anna watched the street sweeping past her, feeling a mixture of unease, anticipation, and fear. It did not take long before the toy windmill entered her field of vision. She got off the carriage, showing no care for her bearing. She staggered quickly towards the door and rang the doorbell. The door creaked open, revealing a blond young man dressed in a black formal suit. He was haggard, but his eyes carried a glint of joy. He had an aquiline nose. "I thought that I would miss you today," Joyce said with a smile. "Oh, exalted Steam, you really are back." Anna rubbed her eyes, exclaiming in pleasant surprise. What the fortune-teller said was true. No, that was a real seer. It was simply fascinating. Thoughts welled in her mind as Anna pounced forward with tears in her eyes and gave her fiancé a warm hug. The two of them hugged silently outside the grayish-blue house. The toy windmill turned slowly, seemingly tossing all their difficulties far away. In a rather spacious living room, Anna and Joyce were seated on different sofas, separated by Anna's parents. Joyce sighed with a satisfied expression and said, "Exalted Steam, I am so lucky to come back alive to be able to see Anna again." "My poor Joyce, what happened?" Anna couldn't help but ask with concern. Joyce took a glance at his fiancée, and his expression turned grave. "I still feel terrified to this day. I keep waking up from my dreams again and again. 5 days after the Alfalfa left Caesar Pier, we came across pirates, scary pirates. The only fortunate thing was that their leader's name was Nast. The pirate that calls himself the King of the Five Seas?" Anna's father, Mr. Wayne, asked in shock. Although Joyce had already been there for half an hour, he did not volunteer details about his ordeal. He appeared to be fearful, perturbed, and uneasy. It was only after Anna returned and hugged him that he finally appeared to put it behind him. Yes, due to his declaration of being a descendant of the Solomon Empire, the King of the Five Seas, Nast didn't believe in killing captives. Hence, we were only robbed and didn't lose our lives. His subordinates even left us sufficient food, Joyce said as he recalled the ordeal. His body started to quiver, but he continued to describe his deepest and scariest nightmare. I didn't lose much of my wealth. I believed that my misfortune was over, but as we continued towards our destination, a heated conflict erupted among the Alfalfa's passengers and crew. From disagreement, to fighting, to drawing revolvers, and raising swords to kill each other. I saw nothing but blood during that period. One after another, people beside me fell with eyes opened, never to be closed. Their limbs, hearts, and intestines were scattered across the floors. Those of us who were unwilling to turn into savage beasts, the rational group, had nowhere to hide and nowhere to escape. We were surrounded by deep blue waves and the boundless ocean. Some wailed, some begged for mercy, some sold their bodies, but their heads were hung from the mast either way. Anna, I reeled in despair back then. I thought I would never see you again. Fortunately, in such a nightmare, there was still a hero. The captain took us to hide in the sturdy keel of the ship, and we relied on the stored water and food there until the maniacs reached their limits. Mr. Triss encouraged us, courageously leading us in an assault against those murderers. After an unforgettable bloody battle, we survived. But the Alfalfa strayed off course, and only a third of the original sailors remained. When he depicted the most horrible and darkest side of the human psyche, Joyce couldn't help but recall the hero, the man that called himself Triss. He had a round and amiable face. He was shy like a girl and enjoyed staying in a corner. Only people whom he was familiar with knew that he was a very good conversationalist. But it was such an unremarkable boy who stood in front of everyone with determination in the worst of days. Oh, exalted steam, my poor Joyce, you went through such a heartbreaking ordeal. Thank God, praise be to God, he prevented us from eternal separation. Tears welled up in Anna's eyes as she constantly dotted 3 points to form a triangle, the sacred emblem for steam and machinery. Joyce revealed a faint pale smile. This is the reward for our faith. The Alfalfa then went through storms, lost its course, and after surmounting one challenge after another, arrived at Enmat Harbor. Due to the bloodbath that had taken place on the boat, those of us that survived were held captive by the police and questioned separately. We didn't have a chance to send telegrams home to update our loved ones. When they released us this morning, I immediately borrowed some money from my friend and took the steam locomotive back. Thank God for letting me set foot on the land of Tingen again, allowing me to see all of you again. Then, he looked towards his fiancée in confusion. Anna, when you saw me, I could feel your happiness and surprise, but I couldn't understand why you rushed towards the door so excitedly right after you got off the carriage. I had planned on giving you a huge surprise. Anna thought about what had happened earlier, and continued in disbelief, there's nothing to hide, Joyce. As I was worried about you, I went to the only divination club in Tingen City today for a divination. That fortune teller. No, the seer told me, he said, your fiancé has returned, he's in the house with a windmill. What? The Wayne couple and Joyce exclaimed simultaneously. Anna covered her face and shook her head. I can barely believe it either, but it happened. Exalted steam, perhaps there really are miracles in this world. Joyce, that seer asked me for your name, characteristics, address, and birth date. He told me he was going to do an astrolabe divination. Then, he asked me if the house with a toy windmill was yours or mine. When I confirmed it was mine, he said, congratulations, Miss Anna, Mr. Joyce Meyer is currently a guest at your place. What he needs now are not questions, but consolation and a warm hug. God, Joyce found it unbelievable and incomprehensible. Does he know me? Did someone send him a telegram? Could it be that he is familiar with the police in Enmat Harbor? No, that doesn't explain it. How did he know that I came to your place? How could he possibly know that you would seek a divination? Did you make an appointment? No, I made a selection at the last minute, Anna replied with a vacant-looking expression. Perhaps a good seer needs to be in control of vast amounts of information, even if it cannot be used anytime soon. Perhaps, that is the fascinating aspect of divination. Anna's father, Mr. Wayne, sighed and concluded. In the known history of more than 1,000 years and in the uncertain fourth epoch, divination has existed and has yet to disappear. I think there must be a reason for that. Joyce shook his head lightly and asked, what's that seer's name? Anna thought and said, Klein Moretti. In the reception lobby of the Divination Club. As Klein had spoken softly, Angelica knew not to go close. Therefore, she only saw Anna leave as though she had lost her soul, wearing shock and confusion on her face. Angelica briskly walked to the sofa and asked out of curiosity, was the result good? She did not dare ask the actual result, afraid of violating the unspoken rule of fortune tellers. Yeah. Klein nodded and took out 3 copper coins from his pocket. 1/8 of 1 soldi is 1.5 pennies, right?
Yes.
Angelica looked at the copper coins and realized that one of them was a penny and 2 of them were halfpence. She quickly held it out and said, "There's an additional halfpence." Klein smiled faintly and said, "Thank you for taking care of my customer. She gave me a tip, so it's only right I give you one. It's also to thank you for recommending me," he added in his heart.
All right.
Angelica felt an unknown fear of Klein, but since the reason was appropriate, she didn't refuse the offer. Klein returned to the meeting room, believing that there would be more people requesting his divinations. However, he did not receive a second customer by 40 minutes past 5. It wasn't because the divination club's business was poor, but because most people had already chosen a fortune teller. They likely were recommended by others and had long determined whose services to hire. In short, I'm still lacking in reputation. Klein laughed at himself for using game terminology. He finished his third cup of Psy black tea, grabbed his top hat and silver-edged walking stick, and walked leisurely out of the meeting room. Angelica suddenly recalled Glassy's instructions, and she quickly moved to intercept him. "Mr. Moretti, when will you next visit the club? Mr. Glassy would like to thank you in person. I will come over whenever I'm free. If fate permits us, he will definitely meet me," Klein replied, using the tone of a psychic charlatan, as though he was in character. Then, he left the club before Angelica could respond and took the public carriage home. When he stepped through the door, Klein found Benson reading the newspaper and Melissa putting together bits and pieces of gears, bearings, and springs in the evening sunlight.
Good afternoon.
"Did Mrs. Shoud visit?" Klein asked casually. Benson didn't put down his newspaper. Instead, he lifted his head. "Mrs. Shoud's visit lasted 15 minutes. She brought some gifts, and she was very happy with the muffins and lemon cake that we prepared. She also invited us over whenever we have the chance to. She is a friendly, well-mannered lady. She knows how to carry a conversation very well too. The only problem is their belief in the Lord of Storms. They believe that girls shouldn't go to school, but should be homeschooled instead," Melissa complained. It was obvious that she was very upset about it.
Don't mind that.
"As long as she doesn't disturb us, she will still be a good neighbor," Klein comforted his sister, smiling. The Lone Kingdom was a multi-religious nation, unlike the Frosak Empire in the north which only believed in the god of combat or the Fanapotter Kingdom in the south which only worshipped Mother Earth. It was inevitable that the congregations from the 3 major churches of the Lord of Storms, the Evernight Goddess, and the god of steam and machinery had conflicts in beliefs and customs. After 1,000 years of this, they restrained each other, making coexistence possible.
Okay.
Melissa pursed her lips and redirected her focus onto the pile of parts again. After dinner, Klein continued revising history. Only when Melissa and Benson showered and returned to their rooms did he wash up, enter his bedroom, and lock his door. He needed to organize and summarize what he had learned and the problems that he encountered to prevent himself from forgetting or missing out any critical points. Only by doing so would he be able to respond to subsequent developments in the future with a clear train of thought. Klein flipped open his notebook, took out his pen, and started writing in Mandarin. "Why is the key to digesting potions acting?" After pausing for a moment, Klein continued writing. "The essence to resolving the problems with potions is through digestion, not simply controlling it. This can be understood in a straightforward manner. Merely controlling it would be akin to using the power of potions as an external tool. A tamed beast, no matter how well controlled, would ultimately not be a part of a person. The risk of it turning on them would be ever present. As for digestion, it is to view the downed potion as a part of them. They can break it down, fuse with it, absorb it, and form an overall system. I am currently certain of this point. What is more important is how acting helps in digestion. According to my experience as a seer today, I can make 2 hypotheses. They can be verified in the future. 1. Acting based on the potion's name changes the state of one's body, heart, and soul, making them closer to the remnant headstrong psyche of the potion's core. This results in resonance which allows gradual assimilation and absorption. 2. The remnant headstrong psyche spirit of the magic medicine might be like a computer with complete defensive mechanisms. If one wishes to attack it and break it down, they will need to find a bug, security hole, or key. The name of the potion provides a corresponding clue. Thus, we can disguise our body, heart, and soul as part of the system through acting, and so we deceive the system's defenses. This line of thought is similar to Emperor Rosel's description. No matter which guess is right, there is no escaping the body, heart, and soul, for they are the only bridge between acting and the power of potions. Klein put down his pen and looked at the paragraph of text. For a moment, he even wanted to thank the education he received from the Footaholic Empire. No matter if he chose science or engineering for his further education, he was equipped with the basics of logical thought. Otherwise, there was no way he could have become a keyboard warrior, nor would he have been able to analyze his current situation. N/O/vel/b//ind.c/om. Acting might have an effect, but we'll have to wait and see for the specifics, Klein guessed. After that, he wrote down his second question. Why would a seer, being more well-learned and professional in the domain of mysticism, be lacking in means when it comes to direct combat? Wouldn't being more well-learned and professional make a seer even more powerful, giving them the ability to discover a way to defeat their enemies? The reasons could be: first, just like the web novels I've read in the past, I have transmigrated to a game world that has become reality. Thus, different jobs come with different specialties that have to be balanced against each other. But up to this point, there has been no sign of this world being a game, nor are there signs of mission-like developments. I'll put this reason on hold, but it's very unlikely. Second, the fundamental law of this world is balance. The Creator made this world with the core idea of balance. Third, potions at the same sequence level would have the same level of power. It is the most optimal state based on what our forefathers found out and summarized. Exceeding this level of power would make it easier for one to collapse and lose control. Below this level of power would make it such that one would not obtain the desired beyonder powers. Thus, under the situation of a balanced power level, being stronger in one area would naturally mean that one is weaker in another area. Fourth, everything in this world originated from the same source. They were formed by the remnants of the Creator. Thus, everything in this world is technically fragments of the Creator, and the fact that they have to complement each other would mean that there are inherent shortcomings to an individual. I am leaning towards the third and fourth reasons, but the latter stems from an unconfirmed myth and can only serve as a guide. Thus, I shall use the third reason as a guide, and try to ascertain it using my current knowledge and future studies. At this point, Klein had already written 2 full pages but did not stop. Instead, he penned a new question. From what I learned today, my luck enhancement ritual is categorized as a classic ritualistic magic. Similar kinds of ritualistic magic can be split into 3 parts, the first being a sacrifice that sparks the interest of a corresponding existence. The second is comprised of incantations specifically describing the existence in question. The third is using simple formatting and symbols to convey what one is asking for. Using this as a benchmark to analyze the luck enhancement ritual, there's an obvious problem. There is no third part. It has the sacrifice aspect in the placement of staple foods and walking a square in a counterclockwise manner with 4 steps. There is also a clear indication who the incantation is for, such as the phrase, "Blessings stem from the immortal Lord of heaven and earth." But all I did after was close my eyes and wait. There was nothing in the ritual that described the goal of enhancing my luck. In other words, the corresponding existence has no way of knowing what the so-called luck enhancement ritual is asking for, and can only do as they see fit. Do as they see fit. What a troll. Isn't that darned quintessential divination and arcane arts of the Qin and Han dynasty too much of a troll? I must have had rocks in my head back then for trying. Klein stopped writing and took 2 deep breaths, trying hard to calm himself down. He spat out a foul breath and continued writing. I can consider redesigning the ritual, making it more complete. The motive of the ritual shall be to return to Earth, back to the world with my parents and friends. Then here comes the question, was the entity truly acting on a whim? Or is there a deeper meaning to it? Also, is the entity that the descriptive incantations point towards in this world the same one from Earth? If so, the difference in results between the first and second ritual could be explained as the entity doing as it wishes. But the results of me appearing above the gray fog during the second and third time, while being able to connect to justice and the hanged man has basically no differences. Why would that be so? If the fourth ritual tomorrow afternoon shows me the same stable results, that would mean that the effects are consistent. That would mean that the unknown entity has an agenda I do not know about. If that is the case, adding new descriptions and requests would not get me a clear response. In fact, it might complicate the ritual and result in adverse effects. Would the difference between the first ritual and the subsequent rituals, under the premise that the entity I called upon is the same one, mean that the results would be different depending on the world I'm in? It is like I am using a different interface. Then how can I design it to obtain my desired outcome? If I think that the entities behind the first and subsequent rituals are different, some of the questions can be perfectly answered. But similarly, the stability of the results in the second and third rituals would mean that the entity I am praying to has a certain agenda, and there is no way I can change that for the time being. The most important question is the identity of the entity that the ritual is directed. Where is he, and why doesn't he give me any clues or guidance? Could he be deep in the world of fog? Can I treat him as an entity in slumber, an entity that would give fixed responses if I give him a certain stimulus, but would not interfere with what I do other than that? Then I can introduce a different ritual as a stimulus and conclude whether the feedback I receive is regular. That way, I can find the correct method of returning. But the problem lies in the possibility that he is not asleep. In that case, such tests might result in terrifying outcomes. It might be really dangerous. The first attempt must be conducted with extreme caution. The design must not anger the being.
What a headache.
I need more knowledge. Klein sighed and gave a summary. Finally, he wrote down other miscellaneous items. There are always formless voices resonating in my ears, shouting Hornaces and, was it saying Phrygia or Phagria? Hornaces is the mountain range dividing the Lone Kingdom and the Intis Republic. Its main peak is 6,000 meters above sea level. According to the records in the Antigonus family's diary, there existed a nation of the Evernight in the 4th epoch. Is the nation of the Evernight related to the Evernight goddess? Is there any connection between the two? Are they allies or enemies? Was the Antigonus family obliterated by the Church of the Evernight goddess due to nation of the Evernight? Did I hear murmurings coming from the diary, from the howls of the Antigonus family over 1 or 2,000 years? What then does Phrygia mean? An interesting question. To be able to leave behind such a diary, to leave behind sealed artifact 2-049 implies that the Antigonus family had possession of a relatively powerful Beyonder power. If that is so, which sequence did they possess? Was it complete or not complete? My realization that the diary is in the hands of Ray Bieber was a bit of a coincidence, but without any indication of it being arranged, could my fate really be tied up with that diary's? His ideas were penned on the pieces of paper. Klein tried his best to write down the events he had experienced and his guesses about their meaning. He wrote a total of 4 pages on both sides of each page. Rip. Klein suddenly tore off the 4 pages and read them from top to bottom, sometimes marking certain sections with his pen, adding a few sentences at other times. Time flew quickly. The crimson moon was temporarily covered by dark clouds. Klein picked up the pocket watch on the table, snapped it open, and looked at the time. He put down the watch and took out a box of matches from his drawer. He lit one and brought it close to the 4 pages of notes. The orange flame ignited the edges of the paper and quickly spread. Klein placed the notes on top of the wooden dustbin and watched the ashes drop. He then released his fingers, allowing the papers to fall. In just 10 seconds, everything had disappeared. All that was left was the still swirling ash and the charred bottom of the dustbin. As there was Emperor Rosel's secret diary in this world, Klein did not dare leave behind any evidence that he knew how to write Chinese. If old Neil and the rest discovered the 4 pieces of paper he wrote, he would have no idea how to explain the matter. And while writing the confidential questions, Klein was worried that the one paying attention to his dreams would be able to see and decipher the contents no matter which language he used, be it Lone, Ancient Phasac, or Hermes. Therefore, he could only write notes in Chinese to organize and summarize. After he was done with the task, he burned the notes to leave no traces. And precisely because there was no way of saving, he set up a plan for himself. He would do this summary once a week just in case he forgot anything. As he watched the ashes fall, Klein pulled out a white piece of paper. He wrote the title, "To My Respected Mentor." He wanted to write to Senior Associate Professor Quentin Cohen, asking if he had any relevant historical information about the main peak of the Hornaces mountain range. The next day, a Monday morning, Klein, who had the day off, didn't leave home. Instead, he gave Melissa his letter directed to Mentor Cohen Quinton and more than enough money to buy stamps. He entrusted her with the job of mailing the letter at the post office near the Tingen Technical School where she studied. After breakfast, he slept in to make up for the lack of sleep caused by the previous night's work. He only woke up because of his stomach's grumblings close to noon. He heated up some leftovers from the night before and ate them with a loaf of rye bread. Klein grabbed a newspaper and entered the bathroom on the 2nd floor. Whenever he did that, he couldn't help but sigh at the lack of a cell phone. After about 7 or 8 minutes, he left the toilet refreshed and washed his hands. He then returned to his bedroom and locked his door. Klein drew the curtains, lit up the gas lamp, and cogitated for half an hour. After practicing his spiritual vision, spirit dowsing, and dowsing rod for half an hour, he spent another hour mentally reviewing the mysticism knowledge he had gained recently. After doing that, he ripped up the old newspaper and crumpled them into a few balls. He wrote on them, moon flower candle, full moon essence oil, and other names of materials. He followed the prescribed steps of ritualistic magic in his head in order to master every little detail. Until he was entirely familiar with it, he didn't intend to try ritualistic magic because it was both a waste of materials and also easily attracted danger. He repeated again and again until he picked up his silver pocket watch patterned with vine leaves and took a glance. He realized that it was 2:45. He considered for a few seconds and brought the scraps of old newspapers to the kitchen on the 1st floor to burn them. While doing so, he made sure he was in an optimal state of mind as he prepared for the tarot gathering. Locking his bedroom door once again, Klein didn't wait for the clock to strike 3. He planned to enter the area above the gray fog ahead of time. He wanted to seize the chance to explore the place thoroughly. As Klein stood in an empty spot in his room and started walking counterclockwise, he suddenly worried that Justice and the Hanged Man had yet to enter a suitable environment. He thought of a particular matter. Would they be disturbed or discovered? He had previously mentioned to allow Justice and the Hanged Man to apply for leave ahead of time if they needed to be absent from the gathering for some reason, such as being unable to find time alone or unexpected circumstances. It would have been an almost unsolvable problem for Klein in the past. There was no way he could build an entire server-based internet by hand in a different world, right? Any technology beyond the telegram could expose him. But now, he had suddenly found inspiration from ritualistic magic. Ritualistic magic borrows the powers of others by seeking the help of different existences. Similar incantations would make it clear who it is directed to in the beginning, such as the Evernight Goddess or the Lady of Crimson. It would be a description of the unknown and clandestine existences. Then, can I amend the chant and redirect the beginning of the chant towards myself?
Directed at me.
This way, even if Justice and the Hanged Man conduct the ritual in different locations, I would receive their messages. Klein suddenly felt fresh insight as he began analyzing the likelihood of the method working.
There are 2 difficulties.
First, I am not an incredibly strong high-level sequencer. Even if the description of the incantation was directed to me, I couldn't possibly receive the request. Second, how can I ensure that the description of the chant is directed at me accurately, and doesn't stray away and hit some other unknown existence that fits the description? That would be incredibly dangerous. Klein paced back and forth, deep in thought for a possible workable solution. He went in circles with silent footsteps. Then, he naturally linked the matter with the mysterious world of the gray fog. Even if I can't receive the message, that doesn't mean the gray fog can't. Its connection with the crimson stars can drag a person into the space directly, regardless of where they are in the physical world. I could consider tying myself to the mysterious space together during the directed description. In accordance with this train of thought, even though I might not immediately receive the request, when the other party is holding the ritual, I will still be able to see the corresponding messages whenever I enter the gray fog. To put it simply, it is the difference between being online and offline on an instant messaging system. Klein became more excited the more he thought. He felt that his idea was worth a try. What kind of description could be used to precisely direct a message to me and to the gray fog world? He started thinking about the actual details. In fact, he had an incantation that would definitely work. It was none other than the lone translation of "Blessings stem from the celestial worthy of heaven and earth." But herein lies the problem. He would lose control of the gray fog and lose his leading role. He could only exclude it. Fool from an alternate world?
No way.
It is quite accurate, and there is almost no other existence that fits the criteria, but it would expose my biggest secret. Klein thought of one incantation after another, but he crossed off each one. After about 7 to 8 minutes, he finally decided on the description of the first paragraph that directed to him. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. It was obviously not accurate enough. Therefore, Klein quickly added, the mysterious ruler above the gray fog. The combination of the 2 lines practically limited it to him. Furthermore, he had tied the gray fog to him.
It's still a little short.
I cannot eliminate the possibility that there are multiple spaces and rulers above the gray fog. I cannot eliminate the fact that the description might be directed to the spirit world. Klein creased his eyebrows and planned on making it more certain. He thought for a full minute and finally decided on the last part of the description. The king of yellow and black who wields good luck. It shared a similar meaning to "Blessings stem from the exalted arch of heaven and earth one." If the incantation purely depended on that part of the description, it might end up being directed away and provoking unknown dangerous existences. But with the first 2 lines as a limitation, and his experience of arriving above the fog through a similar incantation, he believed that the target's description could result in a perfect lock-on. Klein wasn't sure if casting the ritualistic magic with those 3 descriptions would be effective, but he was definite that it would not attract the attention of another existence, it wouldn't throw Justice and the Hanged Man into danger. Klein heaved out a long sigh and recited the incantation that he had decided upon. The fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, you are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. He nodded his head slightly and took out his pocket watch to confirm the time. It's already 2:58. Without further thought, Klein put away his pocket and entered cogitation. Soon he chanted and took 4 steps counterclockwise to form a square. The most ferocious noises and heart-stirring roars were heard once again. He felt the headache that was even harder to deal with than the pain of consuming the seer potion. The pain was not a sharp pain that tore through his head. It was a throbbing pain that made him manic and irrational. It was a pain that left him in chaotic confusion. Klein controlled himself using cogitation and tried hard to ignore the voices. N/O/vel/b/b/in.c//om. The muttering and murmurs receded like the tides. His body became ethereal, along with his spirituality. Everything seemed to float. The boundless gray fog appeared before his sight, the crimson stars at varying distances from him, just like pairs of eyes. Above the gray fog stood the palace, lofty and towering like the home of a giant. It was as though it had been there for millions of years. All Klein did was will it, and he disappeared from where he was, reappearing at the seat of honor at the long bronze table with 22 high-back chairs. The effect of the ritual is definitely fixed, Klein muttered. He tapped his glabella gently and allowed the fog to engulf him, ones thicker than before. According to the description of the hanged man, if Justice had become a spectator, it would be best not to reveal any of his tics before her. Without any time for exploring, Klein extended his right hand and formed an invisible connection, connecting him to the two familiar crimson stars. On the roaring blue waves of the Sonia Sea, an ancient sailboat was sailing with the wind. Alger Wilson locked himself in the captain's cabin and made Ghost Ship provide him the best protection. He opened the pocket watch before him and laid it next to the brass sextant. The clock was ticking without joy as it exuded nervousness. When the hour hand, minute hand, and second hand aligned, there was an explosion of crimson before Alger Wilson. It ignored the layers and layers of protection he had placed over himself.
Sigh.
His sigh reverberated across the captain's room.
Backlund, Empress Borough.
Audrey Hall laid against a down feather pillow and glanced at the yellow paper in her hand. Her gem-like eyes looked like they had two souls spiraling slowly in them. Her gaze was calm and cool, as if she were waiting for a play to begin. As the crimson red erupted, she looked at herself being swallowed with complete detachment. Above the gray fog, in the magnificent palace, on the ancient and mottled long bronze table, Klein, who had already activated his spiritual vision, looked over when Audrey Hall's figure began to form. He was not surprised to see that the colors deep in her aura had blended together. It became pure and serene, like a lake that was clear and reflective.
She really did become a beyonder.
Klein was just about to move his gaze away when he suddenly saw the chair belonging to Miss Justice change. The bright stars on the back of the chair moved swiftly, forming an illusory constellation that didn't belong to reality. That constellation was familiar to Klein because it was one of the symbols of mysticism. It was a symbol that represented Giant Dragon.
Spectator.
Giant Dragon. Klein restrained himself from shaking his head and looked over at the back of the hanged man's chair. Typically speaking, it was impossible for him to see the back of the chair from his angle, but this was where he was in control. Everything presented itself according to his will. The constellation on the back of the chair had not changed, but since Klein had grasped the basics of mysticism, he wasn't as ignorant as before. He could recognize that it was the symbol of windstorm.
Sailor.
Keeper of the sea.
Windstorm.
That's reasonable. The color deep in the hanged man's aura is much purer than it was.
Has he leveled up?
Oh yeah, what about the symbol behind my chair? Klein suppressed his impulse to look, rapped the edge of the long table thrice just like before, and smiled as he said, "Congratulations, Miss Justice, you are a beyonder now." He can tell straight away? Audrey was stunned and smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mr. Fool, and thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. That was much faster than I thought," Alger Wilson said honestly. Klein didn't continue the topic but tapped his glabella and said with a smile, "Lady sir, have either of you found Roselle's diary?" Upon hearing the fool's question, Audrey did not immediately answer like in the past. Instead, she widened her crystalline eyes and glanced at the hanged man with a scrutinous attitude. Alger subconsciously subdued his body motions. After a few seconds of silence he said, "I found 2 pages of the Emperor Roselle's diary and have memorized their contents." "I have 1 page," Audrey, whose vision was obscured by the fog, said as though she was removed from the conversation.
Pretty good.
Klein did not allow his joy or his disappointment be noticed from his voice. He felt joy as there were 3 full pages, but disappointment also because there were only 3 pages. Their initial search for the diary was definitely easier, for all they had to do was ask through their connections and channels they were already familiar with. Collecting the pages would become more and more difficult as time went on, as it would involve more and more elements. "Should we express them now?" Audrey inquired with a calm tone.
Yes. Klein simply nodded.
He maintained his posture without any change. He had to be cautious in front of a spectator. As he finished his sentence, pieces of yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and dark red fountain pens appeared in front of Audrey and Alger. The two of them picked up their pens and started to recall the symbols they had seen. They also infused the emotions of expressing them out. Silently, lines of text appeared on the goatskin. Some of them appeared proper, some delicate, others slanted. In a mere minute, the contents that Alger and Audrey had forcibly memorized were all written. Klein willed the 3 pieces of parchment into his hands. He gave the pages a cursory glance and realized that some of the grammar was wrong. There were also missing and wrong words in the content. But experimentation had proved that incorrect sequencing of words to some extent did not affect the overall comprehension of Chinese. Klein was also not afraid of missing words, since he often read web novels filled with censored asterisks.
April 8th.
I stood at the bow of Black King and stretched my arms, saying to Grimm and Edwards, "My fortune is yours for the taking, but you'll have to find it first." I left everything I own at the ends of the fog sea. They did not understand my humor at all, and even asked if I really had other treasures.
How boring.
You can't be my 4 horsemen of the apocalypse if you keep at that.
April 11th.
I discovered a nameless island that was not on a safe sea route. There are a good number of extraordinary animals there. No, I prefer calling them extraordinary beings, it feels more impressive that way. Other than that, there are several weird creatures on the island. I believe that if Darwin had been transmigrated there is no way he could have written his theory of evolution.
April 15th.
Grimm has suddenly become a little odd. Has he been infected by something? When did the Emperor Roselle, who was born in the Intis Kingdom, set off on a voyage? The Fog Sea should be the sea west of the Intis Republic. Yeah, I need to use historical information from the library to cross-reference this. Klein quickly finished reading a page, casting his gaze to the back of the piece of paper. N/O/vel/B//ind.C//om. At this point, he no longer hid the fact that he could decipher Emperor Roselle's secret symbols, since this ability fitted the persona and status of the fool. Audrey and Alger did not speak. They waited silently, as if unsurprised by such a revelation. In fact, they even believed that it was only right.
October 2nd.
They actually wanted me to marry Matilda from the Abel family, without even consulting me first. Heavens, I have not even met her.
No, I must decline.
Even if I were to run away from home and survive on my own and suffer the vicissitudes of life, I must fight against this marriage.
October 5th.
Miss Matilda is really pretty.
October 6th.
Her personality and her demeanor is just my type. I am starting to look forward to the marriage. Hey, Emperor, where is your integrity? Klein leaned back into his seat, not allowing his emotions to pass through the fog. He realized that Gustav did not write in his diary every day early on. Most of the time, he would only write in the diary when there were certain events that he needed to lampoon, record, or to vent his emotions. He shifted his gaze downward. Klein looked at the last sentence of this page.
October 9th.
They actually called me the son of the steam. I like that very much. Klein was a little disappointed that the information in the first 2 pages was of little value.
But he did not turn sullen.
He moved the 3rd page to the top. This page had content written on both sides of the paper.
May 21st.
The Church of the God of Craftsmanship gave me 2 choices, 2 beginning sequence pathways. One of them is the Savant. It is a complete sequence pathway they possess. The other is Mystery Prior, which they obtained from the Moses Ascetic Order, but it lacks the higher sequences.
May 22nd. My choice was easy, Savant.
The Savant has a complete sequence pathway. Although wielding more information on mysticism can aid my return home, the problem is that if I am not strong enough, there is a need to acquire external help for transmigration. And I do not know if this external entity would be good or bad, benevolent or malicious. I cannot control it, and thus it could be very dangerous. In that case, why not strengthen myself and return by relying on my own powers? Thus, the complete sequence was the most important factor in my considerations.
May 23rd. I have become a savant.
With the power of the potion, I actually recalled all the knowledge I had learned in the past, such as physics, chemistry, etc. I have not only recalled the knowledge, but I understand it more deeply, as well as its possible applications and implications. Haha, this is a job specially tailored for a transmigrator like me from an alternate realm. I will be able to express my advantage to the greatest extent. I have to say that if I were to return in my present state to the 3rd year of high school, I would definitely become top scholar. If I could further specialize in an area, it wouldn't even be too hard for me to become a scientist. May 26th. I am enjoying my status as a savant. Something odd worth mentioning. When I address myself as a savant, doing things that are in line with this role, the murmurings that drive me crazy become considerably softer. I have also been able to control my occasional temper outbursts. I have also recalled the matter regarding the diary. Is this the acting that the mysterious Mr. Zeratul mentioned? This could be key in resolving the side effects posed by potions. As Klein read the diary page, he had a deep realization that there was a fundamental difference between how he and the Emperor Roselle did things. For example, regarding the matter of returning home, Klein considered grasping in-depth knowledge of mysticism to avoid risks and accomplish his goal, while Emperor Roselle preferred to rely on himself and face the risk. I have to say, I envy people like that sometimes. Perhaps everyone yearns for something they do not possess. Of course, I also have to consider strengthening myself. Both of these are important, Klein thought, sighing a little. The description provided by Emperor Roselle about acting instilled Klein with confidence that the conclusion he made about acting yesterday was more or less correct. He put the 3 diary pages down, looked up at Justice and the hanged man. He smiled and said, "My apologies, I was too absorbed in reading them." Audrey calmed the envy in her heart and smiled faintly.
I can understand.
I hope to one day be able to exchange information about the diary's contents. That will require a price. Klein smiled and glanced at Justice, then swept his gaze towards the silent hanged man. Audrey put her palms together and placed them in front of her. "Mr. Fool, Mr. Hanged Man, I have 3 questions to ask. If you think that the answers warrant a high price, tell me what you want, I will try my best to seek it." "No problem," Alger answered succinctly. Klein nodded and leaned back further, making himself comfortable. Audrey thought for a few seconds and said, "The first question is, what does acting really mean? I realize that the remnant psyche in the potion has minute effects on me. Is that because I've been acting as a spectator all this while?" Alger did not speak. Instead, he looked at the fool, as though waiting for him to give an answer. Klein rubbed his finger on the edge of the table and said in a relaxed tone, "Let me explain this with an analogy. Imagine the core powers of your potion as a tightly guarded castle. The remnants of the psyche that can cause a lashback resides within that castle. Our goal is to get rid of it and become the true master of the castle. There are 2 ways we can do that. The first is to forcefully invade the castle. There is no guarantee that this will work, and you will most definitely injure yourself unless you can suppress it with absolute power. But of course, we are not equipped to do that. The second way is to get the owner of the castle to extend an invitation. This invitation can allow us to slide through the scrutiny of the guards and infiltrate the castle. We can then easily finish off the enemies. But the problem lies in the fact that this invitation specifies the facial features and characteristics of the guest. Thus, we have to disguise ourselves and act as the guest. Do you understand?" Alger immediately asked, as if he had anticipated this reply, "Then the aforementioned invitation is the name of the potion's sequence?" "That's right," Klein answered with great affirmation. Audrey froze for a moment, having the sudden feeling that she completely understood what acting meant. She immediately exited her spectator state due to her excitement. She praised in joy, "What an exceptional method, I think it fits your title. Its style is very compatible with the fool. I would never have believed that acting would have such an effect. Luckily, I have been acting as a spectator the past few days." She paused for a moment before saying, "I think that this is a very valuable answer. My heart is not at ease accepting it for nothing." "Mr. Fool, what do you need in exchange?" "Of course, I still remember that I owe you a page of Emperor Roselle's diary." "More pages of Roselle's diary?" Klein paused for a moment. He had wanted to get information about the sequence regarding the seer but felt that such a low-level request would ruin the mystical image of the fool. Thus, he chose to give up on it and planned to ask them discreetly some other day. "I just advanced recently and have yet to completely digest the seer potion." He consoled himself and added on without expression, "Anything regarding the Antigonus family, even if I'm already aware of them myself." Alger remained silent for a few seconds. He looked at the top of the long bronze table for a moment before slowly opening his mouth. "Mr. Fool, I believe I can pay you back immediately with the information you requested just now." "No problem." Klein tried to maintain his unchanging deep tone. He rested his left elbow on the armrest of his chair and supported his forehead slightly with his fingers, posing as though he was listening calmly. Alger deliberated over his words and said, "The Antigonus is an ancient family. Their history can be traced back to the Cataclysm epoch before the 4th epoch and is related to the Second Blasphemy Slate." "The Second Blasphemy Slate? There's a Second Blasphemy Slate? How many are there?" Klein's pupils shrank, and he nearly changed his posture. According to what the Hanged Man and Justice have said previously, the Blasphemy Slate contained the profound mysteries of the 22 paths of the divine. There are 2 of such important items, or even more. 22 paths of the divine. Sequences and pathways. Could these 2 nouns mean the same thing? Every complete sequence pathway leads straight to the throne of the divine? At that instant, the description of the Second Blasphemy Slate gave Klein numerous thoughts. He believed that if not for the thick grayish-white fog concealing him, his emotional reaction would probably have been discovered by Miss Spectator. As for the words Cataclysm epoch, He was no stranger to that term as a historian. It was the name of the Third Epoch. After his recent revision, Klein even knew that the Third Epoch was separated into two eras, the Glorious Era and the Cataclysm Era. A second blasphemy slate? Audrey plainly revealed her ignorance on the matter. Before she calmed her emotions, she returned to her spectator state.
Nice question.
Klein secretly cheered for Miss Justice. It was a question inconvenient for him to ask as the fool. Alger stole a glance at the fool and noticed that his posture remained the same, nor did he make a sound. Hence, he thought and answered, the first blasphemy slate appeared in the Dark Epoch, which is the second epoch where we humans struggled to survive under the protection of gods. The second blasphemy slate appeared at the end of the Third Epoch. It could even be said that its appearance symbolized the end of the Cataclysm Epoch. The content of the two blasphemy slates is kept secret by the 7 major churches. I only know bits and pieces of it. I only know that they involve the pathways to godhood, but I am not sure of the differences between them. Was the blasphemy slate that Emperor Roselle saw the first or the second? Audrey asked curiously. Upon hearing that, Klein recalled what Alger said about the potion names during the first gathering. He said that the names of the sequence potions were derived from the blasphemy slate. Similarly, Captain had also mentioned that the formation and completion of the potion system was thanks to the birth of the blasphemy slate. That indirectly confirms that the pathways to godhood are the sequence pathway. Klein answered his earlier question silently. Then Alger simply replied, the second one. The glint in Audrey's eyes diminished and she returned to her spectator state. She did not continue asking questions. Instead, all she did was focus her gaze on the hanged man. It was obvious that her scrutiny made Alger uncomfortable, but he suppressed the emotions within him. He lowered his voice and continued, during the Solomon dynasty in the Fourth Epoch, although the Antigonus family was considered an illustrious part of the aristocracy, they didn't do anything very memorable until they supported the establishment of the Tudor Empire. They then stood right in the middle of the stage of northern continent. In that period, Antigonus, Ammon, Abraham, Jacob, and others were illustrious names of the human kingdom. However, after the War of the Four Sovereigns, the Blood Emperor from the Tudor Empire perished. They fell from the top of their pedestal and are now hunted by the 7 gods. I am not sure about the actual process, but I do know that the Antigonus family was destroyed at the hands of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. Mr. Fool, if you'd like to know more, I am afraid that you can only obtain the information from the Church of the Evernight Goddess or from the few ancient secret organizations. You know which few I am referring to.
I don't.
Klein nodded while feeling bitter inside.
Okay.
The secret order is 1. Captain and Old Neil mentioned the Moses Ascetic Order. I wonder if the psychology alchemists count. While he mentally checked off the candidates, Alger provided him with the last bits of information. I similarly have no idea which sequence pathways the Antigonus family held. There are only 2 adjectives that appear repetitively in the descriptions of the Antigonus family, and those are strange and terrifying. Strange and terrifying. Thinking back to the notebook, the original Klein and his classmates, and what happened to Ray Bieber's mother, it really is aptly worded. Klein continuously rapped the edge of the long table with the tip of his finger a couple of times.
Then, he slowly began to speak.
Very well, I am satisfied with the payment. The reason he continuously rapped the long table lightly with his fingers was to emphasize the action, to make Justice and the hanged man believe that he had a habit of rapping in order to conceal the fact that the same motion was used to activate and deactivate his spirit vision. It's my pleasure. Alger did not say anything else. Audrey took a look at the hanged man and then the fool. She smiled faintly and said, then, I shall ask the second question. What is the name of the subsequent potion for spectator? Where can I find the clues? I'd also like to ask so straightforwardly, but different choices lead to different difficulties. Klein did not speak but cast his gaze towards the hanged man. Alger remained silent for a few seconds before saying, I'll answer the question for free because I led you on this pathway. The subsequent sequence for spectator is sequence 8 telepathic. The ancient name of sequence 7 is psychianalyst but is called psychiatrist now. This is what I found out from a member of the psychology alchemists. I think they should have quite a number of potion formulas for this pathway. Psychology alchemists. Spirit Medium Daily was rather approving of their theory, but Captain thought of them as evil and crazy. Klein listened while in deep thought. Do you know the whereabouts of that particular psychology alchemists member? Asked Audrey as her eyes beamed with joy. Be it telepathic or psychiatrist, both names appealed to her aesthetics. Alger gave a rare laugh.
I do.
He's immersed in the seas around Sonia Island. I sank him with my own hands. If you would like to look for the psychology alchemists, I have to apologize since I severed the clues. He was not worried that Justice would find his identity through his description because he did that on his own, out of the public eye. Sank, Audrey was at a loss how to reply or what expression to wear. She drew a deep breath and suddenly failed to maintain her spectator state. She asked bashfully, the third question. If, and I'm saying if, a normal animal were to drink a sequence 9 potion, what would happen? What kind of a question is that? Klein tapped his glabella unnoticeably with his finger that was supporting his forehead. Very quickly, he saw the changes in color and noticed that Audrey's emotions had turned frantic, nervous, and a little ashamed. Could she have done something that stupid? Klein was astounded, but didn't find it strange. After the past 2 gatherings, he was certain that Miss Justice was quite an airhead. The hanged man, Alger, was obviously dumbfounded as well. He took a while to reply. Normal animals do not have the brains of humans. They wouldn't be able to learn cogitation in a timely manner. Therefore, it would most likely lead to immediate death or a breakdown into a monster. However, if they survived the initial ingestion of the potion, they should become an extraordinary creature. If the potion has the ability to enhance their intelligence, they can even become smarter.
All right.
Audrey breathed out a silent sigh and nodded while saying with a relaxed tone, I have no other questions. Alger considered for a moment and did not mention matters regarding the Aurora Order or the listener. Similarly, he shook his head and said, Nor do I.
I have something.
Klein didn't change his posture but said with a smile, It will require your cooperation. He had yet to turn off his spirit vision, and he immediately saw that the hanged man was showing signs of nervousness, while Miss Justice was too simple-minded to show fear or carefulness. Before they could reply, Klein comforted them, Don't worry.
It's trivial.
If it succeeds, it will be beneficial to you, so I wouldn't be paying extra remuneration.
Go ahead.
Audrey instinctively entered the spectator state, but she couldn't see through the thick gray fog engulfing the fool. As you will, Alger replied, steadying himself. Klein moved his fingers and smiled when he said, Previously, I said that we would do some experiments to enable you to ask for a leave of absence. That way, you do not have to worry if you have to be somewhere inappropriate on a Monday afternoon.
That's our wish.
Audrey loosened her tightly knitted eyebrows. Alger thought and said, What do you need us to do? You could try a piece of ritualistic magic during your free time. It need not be too formal. As long as you are in an environment that won't be disturbed. Put 4 brand new candles on an altar, placed on 4 corners respectively. It's best if they are candles with a sandalwood scent. Put a loaf of white bread near the candle on the top left corner, a bowl of fenipater noodles near the candle on the top right corner, paella by the candle on the bottom left corner, and a desi pie by the candle on the bottom right corner. Use a silver knife to make a sealed spiritual environment. Klein described his modified version of the luck enhancement ritual and taught Miss Justice how to create a spiritual environment for free. To be frank, as the ritual was targeted at himself, Klein believed that the former part, which was intended to attract the interest of an entity, could be omitted completely. However, he still worked hard to make the procedure seem important. Of course, it didn't comply with what old Neil taught about gods being second and oneself being third. N/O/vel/b//ind.c//om. Mix moonflowers, gold mint, slumber flowers, fingered citron, and rock rose together, then distill it. Extract it for its essential oil, then pour a drop onto each candle. Audrey listened with piqued interest as she recorded all that he said. When he was done, she asked, What about the incantation? Mr. Fool, what's the corresponding incantation? Alger stopped writing with the fountain pen in his hand as well. He turned his head to look at the fool. Klein, who was immersed in the gray fog, tapped the edge of the long table with his finger lightly and said calmly and monotonously in Hermes, The fool that doesn't belong to this era, you are the mysterious ruler above the gray fog, you are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck.